Chapter 490. Murdering an active Federation lieutenant colonel might be a little tricky for the scions of the aristocratic families hidden in the shadows of power, especially the scions of the 7,000-year-old families. However, it was definitely not a real problem. Back on the Hushan Road, Su Li's knife flashed, and Park Ji-ho, who had a promising future, was suddenly turned into a ghost. He never had a chance to shine again. However, the Madam of Macho's Mountain didn't say a word. Shenli only made a few phone calls, and the investigation fell apart. In the end, it was quiet. Even the Bureau of Proclamation couldn't find any mistakes. Looking further into history, there were several Federation presidents who were assassinated. In the shadows of history, the silhouettes of the 7 aristocratic families could be clearly seen. Although the government's powerful strike and the common people's collective will counterattack, the 7 families of today never again used such a bloody measure of mutual destruction. However, no one doubted that they, who occupied the vast amount of resources in the universe, possessed such a terrifying ability. However, if the lieutenant colonel they wanted to kill was called Su Lu, this matter would become a little troublesome. Even the second young master of the Zhong family, who had always run amok in the West Woods, became a little nervous. The voice on the other end of the phone continued, "Don't worry, we've already investigated clearly. The Madam of Macho's Mountain doesn't like him, and he's not the illegitimate son of the old man." After a very simple conversation, Zhong Ziki hung up the phone. As for the specifics, the subordinates of both sides would contact and arrange. In fact, this arrangement had been going on for a long time. They were just waiting for a specific time to explode. The reason why he still seemed a little hesitant and asked those questions on the phone was purely because he was a little worried about Su Li's background. As for the specifics, Zhong Ziki and the other scions of the aristocratic families weren't worried. The 2 experts from Bermuda didn't know who issued the mission. Whether it was the flow of funds or contact, it was all handled by the most professional people. After the experts entered the Federation, they were equipped with firearms from the Green Dragon Mountain troops, now the armory of the 1st Special Division. The 2 experts from Bermuda were able to wait silently in Sunset State for such a long time without being caught by the military and the Federation Investigation Bureau because they had hidden forces in the government and West Woods. On the surface, this cold-blooded murder that had been planned for a long time had nothing to do with them. Zhong Zi looked forward to the brilliant sunlight coming in from the balcony. When she thought of Su Li's corpse lying on the street not long after, she revealed an extremely joyful smile. He did not know the specifics of the assassination plan, but since those guys in the capital ring dared to make a move, they must have received the tacit approval of some old people. They would not leave any chance for Su Lu. The sunlight on his face made him think of the omnipotent, the glory of the charter. The joyful smile on Zhong Ziqi's face turned into a trace of mockery. These scions of the aristocratic families were very clear about the working process of the Bureau of Proclamation because it was probably the only existence in the universe that they were in awe of. The Federal Central Computer strictly adhered to the first law of the Charter. Except for first-order incidents like the invasion of the Empire, it was strictly prohibited from making any criminal prejudgment or warning. It could only play a role in the investigation after the incident. However, the people who carried out the investigation were people, and the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation were also people. As long as they were people, they had to live in the Federation. For the high and mighty big shots in the Federation, they were all targets that could be toyed with in the palm of their hands. You clearly knew that we were going to kill him, but you couldn't give a warning in advance. Don't you feel very depressed? Zhong Ziqi looked at the sunlight on the balcony happily and raised his teacup. Then, he remembered that the other party was a cold computer and couldn't help but feel bored. Hearing Su Li's words, the staff's expression changed slightly. After a long silence, he sighed with some sadness. When the young miss left, the rabbit she raised was already 12 years old. Now, 5 years have passed. We tried our best but couldn't keep it alive, so we had to change to another one. But I don't think the young miss can tell. In order to pick an identical rabbit, the commander put in a lot of effort. The HTD headquarters in the region even transferred a batch of rabbits from S3 over. Sulu was silent. Thinking of the West Woods region's rabbit hunt at that time, he deeply felt the tiger's love for little watermelon. Was there a trace of guilt in this love? This was the relationship between the Zhong family in the West Woods and the Federation. Sulu knew very well that little watermelon staying in S1 Shisha state was equivalent to the status of a hostage. It was rare for father and daughter to see each other again. This was a great sorrow in life. Thinking of this, his mood became a little lonely. He clearly felt the helplessness of the Zhong family, the overlords of the West Woods in everyone's eyes. He stood in front of the empty cage and looked at the fat and white rabbit in silence for a long time. I think, she should have known that the rabbit she raised was no longer there. Sulu thought of that smart and cute little girl who always liked to say cool in the face of strange things. His mood was a little sour. He said in a low voice, "She just doesn't want to forget what happened when she was a child." He comforted the staff and said, "Since that's the case, it's best that we don't expose it." The white-haired staff's old eyes were a little wet. He chuckled and said, "Yes, in fact, there are many people in the old house who miss very much. I don't know when she will come back." Sulu didn't answer. He couldn't answer. The historical convention between the capital ring and the Zhong family in the West Woods couldn't be broken by a random hero. If little watermelon's arrogant father couldn't do it, who could? He took out his mobile phone and began to record the video in the cage. He used a slightly hoarse voice to describe the video email he was going to send to little watermelon. "It's living quite happily now. It just looks like it needs to lose weight. Although the cage is big, it's always too lonely without companions. Do you think, should we find some friends to play with? But I heard that Commander Zhong also looked for it before, but it was in a bad mood, so it was very fierce and bit the other children's rabbits. So it's okay to be fat, as long as it's in a good mood. What do you think? Little watermelon." In the antique living room of the old house, Sulu held the antique Guna porcelain cup and sniffed the fragrant tea in it. He tried to act as elegant as possible to convince himself that he didn't offend the antique atmosphere of the Zhong family's old house. Unfortunately, when the slightly hot tea seeped into his throat, and he was about to praise the wonderful works of the predecessors that he memorized when he was young, a warning appeared in his left eye again. Zhong Ziki, Lin Daohai, and the Federal Central Computer easily detected the content of the phone call and confirmed the identity of the other party through the chip. Because Sulu was the first protected person, the result was quickly transmitted to his mind. If these children of the aristocratic families knew that the situation was developing like this, they wouldn't be able to sit still in their chairs, enjoy the beautiful sunshine, and deduce the date of Su Li's death. Sulu wasn't surprised to see these two names. Holding the teacup, there wasn't a trace of emotion on his face. He quietly turned on his phone and watched the video mail that had just arrived. When he saw Mrs. Zhong suggesting that he go to the restaurant at the intersection to eat the special rat meat when he left the old house, he couldn't help but smile gently. There was an old saying that only the muzzle of a gun could spurt out clouds and wind. This sentence was very suitable to describe the current him. The big shots in the upper class of the Federation, the powerful and terrifying professional experts, were all very powerful existences, but what did this have to do with him? Since those wonderful things happened to him, Sulu had pulled away from the level of the so-called conspiracy. He was more powerful than everyone, even the entire Federation, thought. Half an hour later, he thought that he had given the other party enough time to react and prepare, so he put down the teacup, politely thanked the staff, and left the old house of the Zhong family at number 36 Wire Road. The black car drove out of the block, and then stopped at the restaurant at the intersection under the shadow of the big green tree to meet up with the members of Group 7 who had come to pick him up. The car window rolled down, and Sulu looked at by Magnolia next to the car. He told her the address of a building and then said, "Be careful." By Magnolia nodded and returned to the dark green military vehicle. She glanced at Xiong Linquan and the others who were adjusting their guns and said softly, "Get to work." Da Vinci, who temporarily replaced Lu Jiao, didn't know what had happened, but he could feel that the atmosphere in the car was even colder and more oppressive than when he was at the front line. He subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva and skillfully started the military vehicle. It made an arc at the intersection and drove into another street under the shadows. Su Le didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he lit a cigarette. The smoke rose from the car window and merged into the western twilight. He narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. There was a row of ordinary buildings behind the restaurant at the intersection. If he could see through those buildings, he should be able to see that building. The people who wanted to kill him were in that building. The old man was restricted by the rules of the charter, and he didn't want the Federation government to know the secrets of his authority. Although the Bureau of Proclamation already knew a little, he didn't tell the Ministry of Defense and the Federation Bureau of Investigation about the two experts from Bermuda, as well as many details of the murder case. A few years ago, he had confirmed under the sunlight in front of the district prosecutor's office that there were always some people above the law in the Federation. These people had never been afraid to use the hands hidden in the dark to do those outrageous and infuriating things. Because of interests, or some glorious words, or sometimes just because of joy and anger, the law of the Federation didn't have the ability to protect his interests and the interests of many people at these particular times. Therefore, Su Le no longer feared the law as much as he did when he was a teenager. Today, he was ready to defend his right to live. The butt of a brand 37 cigarette fell from the car window to the ground, smashing into a few sparks. His hands that were tightly holding the steering wheel were calm as usual. He drove the car to the restaurant at the intersection. Almost at the same time, a dark green military vehicle drove into the underground parking lot of a certain building. Chapter 491. 40 minutes ago, inside building number 36 in Latitude 2 District, there was an interstellar communication. This time, the communication seemed very ordinary, but it used the military's internal signal, so the civilian communication system could not detect it at all, let alone eavesdrop. There was an abandoned warehouse beside Sunset State's Route 4. The basement of the warehouse was actually a relay analysis station of Ceylon's military. The relay analysis station captured these fragments of information and then encrypted them with a shell. These fragments were then added with a military secret rune string and launched out of the atmosphere. Through the Federal Military Signal Relay Station, they entered the interstellar communication system. This was a routine process. The seemingly complicated system reaction happened in a very short period of 0.001 seconds. All of it was completed by the automatic equipment underground, and it did not attract anyone's attention. Naturally, no one noticed. A second lieutenant in room C2 of the analysis station had sweat dripping down his eyebrows. He took off the headphones on his head, coughed twice, and gently pressed a button. So a simple, clear, and complete information report quietly left the analysis station and passed through a hidden backup channel into a closed room in the Changfeng military base. In the room, an engineer in a white uniform licked his lips, shook his head, and encrypted the information algorithm. Then it was sent out through the common channel between the Military Aviation Command System and the Civil Aviation System. Countless warships and civilian spaceships were taking off and landing on Ceylon's main planet every day. The security level of the common channel between the two systems wasn't high, and the redundant information was complicated. This information disguised as a redundant signal easily passed through the system's filter and entered the internal pipelines of Sunset State's civilian spaceport like spider silk. In the washroom on the far right of the arrival area of the Sunset State Airport, behind the partition, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man sat silently on the toilet bowl and stared at the holographic screen on the miniature workbench in front of him. After seeing the display on the holographic screen, a satisfied smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The information had been obtained. The middle-aged man didn't hesitate to pull out the data cable connected to the pipeline behind him and pressed the flush button. In a brief flush sound, he cleaned up all the traces in the washroom, put on the windbreaker hanging on the wall, and walked out with a blank expression. In the magnificent lobby of the arrival area of the airport, a traveler in a plaid shirt was chatting with a waitress in a blue dress. "We're at war now, so there are very few tour groups coming from S1. The waitress smiled and said, "You're a freelancer. It's not that easy to find a discount hotel." The traveler in the checkered shirt was about to say something when he noticed a middle-aged man in a gray windbreaker walking out from the corner of his eye. The two of them did not speak, but the traveler understood in his heart. He smiled and said goodbye to the waitress, and followed the man out of the restaurant. The middle-aged man in the trench coat waited for about 10 seconds at the luggage arrival area. A staff member with a hat pulled down very low handed over a box with a standard luggage tag stuck on it. The middle-aged man carried the suitcase to the waiting area of the airport bus. He glanced at the luggage tag. The date on the tag was today, but he knew that the suitcase had been waiting for him at the airport for many days. In fact, he had also been waiting for many days in this city. When the bus arrived, he casually threw the suitcase into the luggage compartment below the bus and sat in the front row. The traveler in the floral shirt sat in the back row far away. 5 minutes later, the middle-aged man in the trench coat got off the bus, took the suitcase, and got into an ordinary car. However, there was a special pass that was very difficult to obtain on the windshield of the car. A few hundred meters later, the traveler in the floral shirt also got into the car. The two of them looked at the watch on their wrists at the same time, confirming that there was still time. In this city, the powerful departments of the Federation Bureau of Investigation and the Ministry of National Defense had been searching for the two of them. Along the way, the black official cars of the Federation Bureau of Investigation could be seen from time to time. However, the two of them did not look nervous at all. With a lot of prearranged cooperation, they changed to 3 different transportation methods, easily passed through the checkpoint set up by the government, and arrived at the foot of a building in the capital of Sunset State. Taking out the prepared keys from under the mat, the two of them pushed open the door to room 1201. 20 seconds later, the traveler in the floral shirt quietly left. The middle-aged man put the trench coat beside the chair and opened the suitcase. His expression was calm as he looked at the metal parts in the suitcase that were painted a matte color. A few seconds later, his 2 hands began to steadily assemble the parts. In just a minute, a powerful non-standard sniper rifle appeared in his hands. Pulling over the chair and taking out the electric taser, the middle-aged man very carefully and quickly rubbed out a gap for the barrel. However, he was not in a hurry to adjust the shooting point. Instead, he came to the window, pulled up the corner of the curtain, and looked out. He saw that the corner of the building below the building was an extremely lively intersection. Those restaurants with red oil signs were very clear. Those boiling pots of red soup under the green trees by the roadside were clearly visible. If it appeared in the optical scope, he would be able to clearly see the green spring onions. After a moment of silence, he narrowed his eyes and gave up on the window. As the best assassination expert in Bermuda, he did not avoid using conventional assassination methods. However, in the territory of the Federation, he was more cautious than he had been in every previous mission. He sprayed a layer of mist on the wall next to the window frame. This mist seemed to have a strong corrosive effect. In just a few seconds, the mixed wall melted a little. Using tools, it took a very short time to dig out a small hole that was connected to the air outside the building. The middle-aged man covered the small hole with the lid of the teacup on the table to prevent the people outside from noticing anything strange. When the corrosive mist effect wore off, he put the non-standard sniper rifle into the hole. Then, he pulled over a chair to stabilize the body of the rifle. At the same time, he placed a full-angle micro-rotation device on the shelf. The specially made electric sight was only about the thickness of a finger, and it was inserted into the hole at the same time. The data cable behind it and the electric fire data cable of the sniper rifle were pulled extremely long. They were carefully connected by the middle-aged man, and then they passed through the air conditioning duct in the room and passed through the air conditioning duct in the room. He carefully placed his windbreaker on the chair and covered the long sniper rifle completely. Then, he cleaned up all the sand marking agent, took out the air freshener from the box, and carefully sprayed it. After all this, it would be difficult for anyone to notice anything strange in a short time if they pushed the door open. Then, he carried the box out of room 1201. Following the shadows of the passage, he came to the stairwell. Then, he walked to the 13th floor and entered room 1301. He quickly lifted a corner of the floor, broke the ventilation duct, pulled out the data cable, and inserted it into his workbench. The scene in the electric scope downstairs clearly appeared on the hologram. The middle-aged man quietly observed the movement at the intersection. He silently adjusted his breathing. His right hand was only 3 fingers away from the electric firing device. The target had not appeared yet, but he was not in a hurry. As the best expert in Bermuda, his patience and caution were his best gifts. He touched the back of his neck. He seemed to feel that the chip was constantly sending some kind of signal. A trace of disgust flashed across his calm face. He then began to think about how to escape back to Bermuda after this successful attack. He knew that the target he was going to assassinate today was a big target. He knew that this was a big deal. However, his experience in the West Woods these days made him even more aware that those who helped him complete the mission, which was the people who issued the mission, had even more terrifying power. The middle-aged man was originally a citizen of the Federation. That was why he could pass the strict inspection when entering the country and reimplant the chip. Therefore, he knew what kind of ability these cold-blooded big shots of the Federation had. With the help of these people, it was not difficult to complete the mission. After making so many arrangements downstairs, he thought that his safety was fully guaranteed. After shooting later, even if the enemy could immediately surround room 1201, it would still leave him enough time to escape. Unless the enemy was an omniscient god, they would not know where he was hiding. On the hologram, a black car drove into the intersection. The middle-aged man's finger steadily rested on the red button of the electric control device. He gently slid the finger to adjust the shooting angle of the sniper rifle downstairs. Looking at the clear data on the hologram, he was somewhat amazed by the imitation ability of the anti-government forces of Green Dragon Mountain. This long-range sniper rifle was much less powerful than the ACW, but in many design concepts, it had been imitated to the extreme. Feeling the smooth feeling between his fingers, he knew that as long as he gently pressed the button, a historical event of the Federation would happen in his hands. The calmest killing expert in Bermuda slightly raised the corner of his mouth to reveal a calm and confident smile. At this moment, he suddenly frowned and slowly looked to the right. Although he did not hear any sound, he always felt that there was something strange in the room that was only a wall away. The military vehicles of Group 7 drove directly to the bottom of the building. The entire streets of the West Woods were filled with military vehicles. They were not worried that they would attract the attention of certain people. However, looking at the several West Woods military vehicles not far away through the filter glass film, Bai Yulan suddenly felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. She silently thought that she was not worried that others would notice her. Did the people in the military vehicles have the same idea? Xiong Linquan pointed to the three-dimensional structure of the building and frowned. All the rooms on the left side of the 8th floor are suitable for sniping. There is no way to monitor all of them. The choice of sniping location is very professional. Or rather, the choice of the place where the boss eats is too stupid. Gu Shifeng's 10 fingers quickly tapped on the hologram. In a very short time, she had hacked into the surveillance system inside the building. With the help of a small software she had developed, she quickly sorted out a few suspicious points. She smiled and patted Big Bear's shoulder. "Don't worry about it. They are in room 1201. The surveillance video on the hologram showed that at some point before, 2 people carrying boxes entered room 1201. Xiong Linquan looked at the back of the man in the trench coat and suddenly said, "It's an expert." Bai Yulan pushed aside the fine hair in front of her forehead and said softly, "I didn't expect him to come." Group 7 had done countless private assassinations in the West Woods and Bermuda over the years. In a sense, they were absolute experts in the world of assassination. And the expert that they took seriously was naturally a real expert. It's too late. Xiong Linquan carried the cello box beside him and prepared to rush into the building. Bai Yulan thought of what Su Lu had said to her before she left. She frowned for a moment and said firmly, "It's not 1201. It's 1301. Chapter 492. When the members of Team 7 heard Bai Yulan's words, they all froze in place. Every time a professional expert carried out a mission, they would never leave behind a strong personal style or assassination plan that could be traced. The expert in the building, who had only left behind a silhouette of his back in the murder files for many years, did not do anything similar. The team members could not understand why Lao Bai was so certain that the expert was definitely hiding in the room upstairs. At that moment, Gu Shifeng, who was in charge of organizing the information, frowned. She covered her ears and listened carefully for a few seconds. Then, she raised her head to look at Bai Yulan and said in a strange tone, "The front surveillance sent back a message. The infrared remote sensing didn't find anyone in room 1201. The optical inspection also didn't find a gun at the window." Bai Yulan, who had been keeping her head down, licked her lips and said in a low voice, "Don't look at me like that. I'm not a monster. Boss is." While everyone was discussing and formulating the plan, his peripheral vision had never left the Silan military vehicles in the distance. He could not get rid of the trace of nervousness in his heart, and some kind of intuition made him decide to directly enter the building through the underground parking lot and not make any contact with the Silan soldiers. Beside the elevator in the underground parking lot, the members of Team 7 had already disguised themselves as passers-by. They silently organized their guns. Only Xiong Linquan was still carrying his cello case with a cold expression. He did not move at all. Gu Shifeng was adjusting the elevator's operating program and monitoring system. Bai Yulan had a cigarette in her mouth and was calculating the surprise attack later. It seemed that none of them had noticed that one of the two targets had already left the building. The structure of room 1301 of the building was sealed, and it had a double compound door. Most importantly, the expert inside was a very powerful person. It would be very difficult to complete a surprise attack before the other party noticed. If they really rushed in, no one knew how many members of Group 7 would die under the counterattack of the other party before they died. "What should we do?" Xiong Linquan's face was gloomy. He spread out his calloused hands and asked. Facing the best expert in Bermuda, especially in such a small space, even he felt that it was a little tricky. Bai Yulan took a deep puff of her cigarette, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed through her slender eyes. She spat out a voice as cold as ice, but also somewhat crazy, "Kill him." When the team members who were about to climb the stairs heard this sentence, their bodies stiffened. They knew very well what kind of offensive attitude this sentence represented. Gu Shifeng looked at Bai Yulan worriedly and said, "What if we messed with the wrong person?" Whether or not the subsequent fierce attack would kill the wrong person completely depended on whether or not the little boss's judgment was correct. Bai Yulan still didn't understand where Su Li's information came from, but she always had some inexplicable confidence in him. Especially when she thought about how some important people of the Federation cold-bloodedly tried to assassinate Su Lu, and how Su Li's life was in danger, the madness hidden in this young lady's body naturally surged out. Therefore, he did not answer Gu Shifeng's question. He stretched out two fingers and made a tactical gesture. Then, he sprayed an aerosol to get rid of the smell of cigarettes and other body odors. The team members did the same. At the same time, they carefully installed the silent rubber pads on the soles of their shoes. The signboards of countless restaurants had the words, "Chili oil," written in bright red, dyeing the entire intersection with a layer of spicy flavor. Although they were all on the side of the street, the floor-to-ceiling windows and the shadows of the trees gave them a clean and elegant feeling. These restaurants had nothing to do with the street stalls. The black car stopped by the red street in the twilight. Su Lu got out of the car and looked at the restaurant not far away. His gaze swept across the roof of the restaurant without anyone noticing and landed on the building in the distance. At this time, he could only see some light-absorbing eaves on top of the building. Presumably, it would be difficult for the enemy to find him through the scope. When the black car had driven into the intersection earlier, it had been the best sniping position. At that time, Sulu thought that the enemy would shoot, and even hoped that the enemy would shoot. This was because he knew that in this world, there were basically no long-range weapons that could shoot through the black car of the Tai family. This was something that the military mecha in Linhai Prefecture Gymnasium had proven years ago. What disappointed him was that the assassination expert in the building was more patient and cautious than he had imagined. Walking towards the restaurant, the hair on the back of Su Li's neck stood up slightly. It was not because of fear, but because of some kind of faint excitement. The excitement came from the unknown, and after a moment, he was not satisfied with this kind of professional role-playing. Being a bait was without a doubt the most dangerous job in the world. The earthworm that caught fish, the youth that lured bulls, and the Jian Shuier that provoked the people of the empire were all like this. Sulu was willing to be the bait because of his own initiative. He had the help of the omnipotent computers of the Federation, and the enemy also had the help of the big shots in the Federation. If Sulu disappeared in front of the enemy would definitely disappear immediately. Furthermore, he could not be like an ancient swordsman who rode a horse all over the universe to chase after the enemy. For an extremely dangerous person like this, especially one who dared to kill him like the upper echelons of the Federation, if he did not ruthlessly strangle the enemy to death, he would not be able to feel at ease. Standing at the intersection, he looked around the city. The capital of the Sunset State was in his left eye. In this city, there were 37 dots of light quietly flashing. Some were in the buildings, and some were in the military base. It was very dazzling. These were the 37 people that the Federal Central Computer had found in this murder case. For the past few months, it was these people who had been secretly helping the killing intent from Bermuda. Looking around, Su Li's young and honest face flashed with a trace of determination. With a trace of ruthlessness, he walked towards the restaurant, his military boots making crisp clicking sounds. In room 1301, a middle-aged man was lying on the carpet. Because he did not have the cover of a windbreaker, the temperature in the room was a little high. His upper arm was pressed against the side of his face. His body was relaxed like a king who was about to sleep peacefully. However, his eyes were always staring at the light screen not far away, staring at the target he was about to kill. He was like an eagle. Naturally, his hands were empty. Beside him was an electric control device and a gun that was ready to be activated. He maintained the best posture and state to shoot at any time. From time to time, his ears would twitch slightly, listening to the sounds in the corridor outside the room. What made him feel at ease was that the outside world was always quiet. In the dark corridor, the self-induction energy-saving lights were not lit. However, the 8 members of Group 7 were like ghosts. They silently crept over and gradually approached the door of room 1301. The black cello case lay quietly at the end of the corridor. Xiong Lin Quan, wearing an infantryman's helmet, carried the heavy Darlin rotary cannon. He was like a giant of death that walked out of the abyss. Beside him, Magnolia silently held a powerful rapid-fire shotgun. The team members kept their breathing extremely slow and gentle. They did not want to alarm the murder expert in the room. If the other party was prepared in advance, it would become a chaotic battle in a small space. No one knew what would happen. At this moment, Magnolia's long breath suddenly stopped. She squinted her knife-like eyes and looked at the other side of the corridor. The gun in her hand had already been raised silently. She coldly pointed it in that direction. A faint light came from the back of the building and sprinkled into room 1301 and room 1302. The team members were shocked to find that a group of fully armed Special Forces soldiers walked out from the darkness on the other side of the corridor. This group of Special Forces soldiers wearing Westwood's military uniforms clearly did not expect that someone would appear silently from the other side of the corridor. Almost at the same time, both sides did not hesitate to raise the guns in their hands and aimed at each other. They aimed at the figure that suddenly appeared in the faint light. Strangely, both sides did not want to alarm anyone. Even though their actions were so orderly and fast, they did not make any sound. No one pulled the trigger. In the dim and narrow corridor, the two groups of fully armed people faced each other with guns. As long as one of them opened fire, the result would be death for all of them. They were all professional soldiers who had been through many battles. They understood each other very well, so they used their strong nerves to control even the smallest of their movements. The entire space was filled with an oppressive and tense atmosphere. Both Team 7 and the people wearing Westwood's military uniforms could not determine the true identity of the other party, especially the purpose of their sudden appearance here. Cold sweat seeped out from the backs of both sides, wetting the silk interlayer of the hard ceramic bulletproof vests. Fortunately, they had sprayed a large amount of aerosol beforehand, so the smell of sweat did not spread. The Westwood soldiers on the other side of the dim corridor were actually more nervous than the members of Team 7. They looked at these men who looked like ordinary passers-by. Their gazes were fixed on the guns in their hands, especially the big guns in the hands of Xiong Linquan and Magnolia. They were extremely shocked, thinking that this kind of firepower was too fucking explosive. Amidst the suffocating atmosphere, Bai Yulan's breathing finally returned to normal. He gestured to the soldiers in front of him and stared at their dark green military windbreakers. He tried to test the texture of their clothes with his eyes. The person in front of the Westwood Special Forces soldiers nodded slightly, then glanced at room 1302 beside him, using his eyes to express his intention. Magnolia did not let his guard down. Like a clumsy fish, he took a few steps forward into the darkness opposite him and slowly took out the special identification that Sulu had obtained from the Zhong family in the Westwoods and showed it to the other party. The soldier glanced at it with the help of the dim light, and his expression relaxed a little. He also slowly took out an identification and handed it to Magnolia for inspection. Magnolia immediately thought of the few Westwoods military vehicles he had seen below the building and roughly understood what had happened. Both parties had top-secret missions, but the rooms for the missions were adjacent to each other, which led to the current terrifying danger. The Westwoods military officer nodded at him. He held the Cayenne in his left hand and spread out his right hand, indicating that the other party should go first. Magnolia shrugged slightly, indicating that the other party should go first. This scene looked a little funny, as if they were going to enjoy themselves in a hotel. In fact, under the current circumstances, neither side could be allowed to launch an attack ahead of time. Magnolia and the Westwoods military officer looked at each other and nodded tacitly. The Westwoods military officer extended his right hand under the dim light, then began to bend his fingers one by one. Finally, he retracted his pinky finger and clenched his gloved fist tightly. Both parties officially began the operation. A Westwood Special Forces soldier did not hesitate to pick up a light doorbreaker and ruthlessly smash it at the door of room 1302. However, what he saw from the corner of his eye made his heart tremble violently. Over at Team 7's side, Bai Yulan held up her terrifying shotgun and unreasonably fired at the door of room 1301. Chapter 493. The rapid-fire shotgun did not have a magazine, only a long and extremely thick cartridge reservoir. This kind of big gun could only fire one shot at a time, but every time it fired, it could fire up to 300 tiny rapid-fire pellets at the same time. What kind of scene would it be when 300 pellets hit the door of room 1301 at the same time, exploding en masse? With a deafening boom, countless dust fragments and bullets exploded in the corridor. The double-layered composite door of the building was easily torn apart into countless pieces floating in the air, unable to be reassembled. With one shot, Magnolia was directly pushed to the wall by the terrifying and huge reaction force. With a dull thud, blood trickled out of the corner of her mouth. Almost at the same time, Xiong Linquan had already occupied his original position. Like a ferocious beast, he roared and pulled the trigger of Dalin's rotary cannon. In reality, when Bai Magnolia fired that violent shot, Xiong Linquan had already pulled the trigger. However, in order for Dalin's rotary cannon to reach its initial speed, there had to be an activation and rotation process. If he pulled the trigger in advance, in just a few tenths of a second, it would definitely alarm the experts in the room. Therefore, he stood valiantly beside Bai Magnolia, allowing those dangerous rapid-fire bullets to explode in front of him, and pulled the trigger in advance. The 6 barrels of the gun hummed and rotated at a terrifying speed. The bullets that were denser than a rainstorm turned into 6 streams of fire, passing through the room door that had already been blasted open. They fiercely and violently blasted into room 1301. Countless pieces of cement and furniture flew in all directions like a cliff that had been crushed into powder by a hurricane. Moreover, when they were still floating down, they were hit by the bullets that filled the entire space. The scene was extremely shocking. While Dalin's rotary cannon was firing, the other members of Team 7 also held their heavy firearms in their hands and opened fire into the room that was filled with smoke and rubble. They could not see anything at all. They were silent. The individual soldiers' helmets reflected the murderous look in their eyes. The guns in their hands vibrated violently, and the heavy roars of explosions rang out continuously, deafening everyone's ears. The Silan Special Forces who had started moving at the same time were dumbfounded by Team 7's unreasonable and abnormally barbaric burst of gunfire. There was actually a team who dared to open fire in such a narrow civilian building. The dozen or so Westwood Special Forces originally wanted to break open the door and capture the target alive, but at that moment, the pungent smell of gunfire and liquid gunpowder that filled the entire space made it difficult for them to control themselves. Most importantly, if these terrifying guys continued to shoot like this, the cement walls would probably be penetrated. Who knew what would happen? Therefore, after just a second, the Westwoods side gave up on their original plan and started firing into the building. In an instant, the sound of bullets flying filled the entire building. 20 seconds later, all the gunshots stopped. Only Darin's rotary cannon was still making a low humming sound. A piece of wallpaper that had been shredded by the rain of bullets slowly fell and landed on the extremely hot barrel. With a sizzling sound, it burned into charred pieces. Both parties went into their own rooms separately. Without any accidents or obstacles, the expert from Bermuda in room 1301 had already lost all of his blood under the effect of countless miserable and huge wounds. There was no trace of life left in him. Bai Yulan looked at the gruesome corpse by the window and shook her head. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and squatted down. However, this level of explosive firepower was unprecedented even for Team 7 because they knew very well the level of expertise of the Bermuda expert in the room. They wouldn't let Sulu get hurt in the slightest. In a situation where they had an absolute advantage in terms of information, they had to finish off the expert as quickly as possible so that the opponent wouldn't have the slightest chance to use any of his tricks. Team 7 chose the most unreasonable but also the most effective method in terms of tactical deduction. They used strong firepower to cover the area, and used simple and violent methods to deal with the delicate and cautious. They directly used flying bullets to end all unknown possibilities. In the stairwell, Xiong Linquan asked her what to do, and Bai Yulan said, "Kill him to the death." This was exactly what they were going to do. The traveler in floral clothing that Team 7 seemed to have forgotten had secretly entered the restaurant 10 minutes ago. He used some unknown method to put on the waiter's black and white uniform and successfully hid from the eyes of the restaurant staff. He easily walked between the kitchen and the street. Whether it was his appearance, his reserved smile, or his standard service methods, there was nothing to nitpick about him. Through the 2 layers of glass, he could see from afar that the target had already walked out of the black car and was walking toward the restaurant. He smiled in his heart and calmly walked back to the kitchen. When he bumped into the head waiter, he slipped into the wine cellar. The wine cellar was full of good wine. The target didn't like to drink, but he had the habit of drinking, especially number 3. He raised his eyebrows slightly, and a thin and long alloy needle appeared in his hand. The needle didn't shine with any strange light, but the poison on it was enough to kill an elephant. All he needed to do was to insert the needle into the cork of the wine bottle and then reseal the bottle. There were many opportunities to poison when ordering wine and eating, but the man was not in a hurry. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall to rest. His left hand gently pressed the modified short magazine H21 in his clothes, calculating the distance when he would shoot later. The sniper in the building was actually a backup method. As an excellent expert in Bermuda, he and his partner in the building were actually more used to killing people at close range. They would poison and then shoot at the head to ensure that they could kill the target. However, at this moment, a few men confidently pushed open the door of the wine cellar and walked in. The expert disguised as a waiter frowned slightly and didn't hide his body. Because of the other party's confident behavior, he walked up and said with a smile, "Sir, I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry." Lan Xiaolong naturally reached into his clothes and then took out a gun. He pointed it at the other party and said, "Just don't move." When Lan Xiaolong reached out, the Bermuda expert didn't move. When Lan Xiaolong pulled out his hand, he noticed the traces of hard objects under the other party's clothes, so he quickly moved. He reached out with his left hand, grabbed the handle, and was ready to shoot. At this moment, he was puzzled. How did the other party find him, and why did the other party dare to walk in so confidently? At this moment, he thought gloomily that he should kill the people in front of him and then leave this strange city as soon as possible. Unfortunately, he couldn't pull out his gun. Although Lan Xiaolong's action was clearly slower than his, he couldn't continue to think because the poisoned alloy needle hidden in his right wrist stabbed into his groin. In the shadows of the wine cellar, two members of Group 7 flashed out like ghosts. One of them grabbed his left hand tightly, while the other grabbed his right hand and forcefully twisted it. Behind him, there was another member who ruthlessly kneed him in the buttocks. He breathed rapidly and struggled desperately. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't make a sound. He only wanted to endure the pain between his legs and push the people on both sides away. However, the strength of the three people who attacked him was so great, especially in a situation where it was 3 against 1. His struggle seemed so futile. Feeling the cold alloy needle slowly piercing into his groin, he felt extremely desperate in his heart. The moment before he died, he burst out with the last of his strength and pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 A series of dense and crisp gunshots echoed in the quiet wine cellar. The bullets followed his clothes and hit the ground powerlessly, piercing his left foot and shattering his last hope. He felt that his hearing was getting weaker and weaker. He felt that the gunshots were louder than his rapid breathing, and it was even louder than the sound of his right wrist breaking. The second expert died just like that. Before he died, he broke his wrist, but he still couldn't escape from the hands of his opponents. His eyes were full of blood, and his body slid down weakly. He swayed a few times and leaned against an oak barrel, unable to move anymore. Group 7's healer, Ho Xiandong, walked forward, took the alloy needle, and sniffed it. He nodded to Lan Xiaolong and said, "It's very poisonous. This person is completely dead." Da Vinci, who got off the car halfway and then followed Lan Xiaolong back to the restaurant, saw the scene in front of him. He was so shocked that his face turned pale. Although it was a silent battle, he always felt that it was more intense than any battle on the front line. The 3 members who were responsible for the sneak attack were already covered in sweat, and their muscles felt like they were being torn apart. Looking at the corpse on the ground, they couldn't help but shake their heads with slight ridicule. Lan Xiaolong held the gun like a toy and looked at the expert who died with his eyes open. He shrugged and said, "I know you are an expert, and you shouldn't have died like this. But this has nothing to do with me. I'm new here. You know, there are 18 experts like you in Group 7, so, it's better to close your eyes." Chapter 494. First of all, I admit that I'm a fan of headlines. These nonsensical headlines are really annoying. Secondly, I want to remind everyone not to forget that I updated 3 chapters on April 1st. If you haven't seen it yet, hurry and read it. Finally, I want to solemnly declare that this is not an April Fool's joke. I really did write 3 chapters. Yesterday, I suddenly had an idea and said that I want everyone to give me your monthly votes for April. When I woke up today, I found that it was quite that. After tugging at my hair for a long time, I decided to seriously tug on it. That's why I said no over the phone. Then, I sat in front of the computer for 8 hours and wrote these 3 chapters. I haven't updated twice in many days, and I haven't updated thrice for many days. I also haven't solicited monthly votes for many days. I don't know why, but these 2 days, I suddenly had an idea. In fact, I have to admit to everyone that I only wrote thrice today because I was crazy. I can only guarantee that the future updates will be continuous. Tomorrow's update will be very late at night, very late at night. Because I started renovating this month, I don't know how much time it will take because I don't have any experience. I'll try to write more, at least more than I did a few months ago. I'll report to everyone first. If there's a second or third update, I'll write it at the end of the chapter. If there's no update, then it's probably still thrice. But I still really want monthly votes. People have to force themselves to do something to achieve a certain goal before they can truly work hard, right? What I need now is the spirit to push myself to the brink of death. Everyone, please vote for me. I like monthly votes and recommendation votes very much. The more votes there are, the higher the probability of me going crazy. This isn't a matter of changing monthly votes, it's purely a matter of mental stimulation. Finally, the most important sentence, I want monthly votes for April. Actually, it's just that I suddenly realized how lonely it would be if we didn't exist in this monthly vote battle. Brothers and sisters, we don't want to be lonely. I want monthly votes, squeeze out all that you have and give it to me. I suddenly thought of a line from a hot dog song, I've been silent for long enough. Next time, I'll use the title, I've been silent for long enough, to solicit votes. Chapter 495. In the dim, smoke-shrouded corridor of the building, the members of Group 7 shook hands with the Westwood Special Forces team and said goodbye, but they did not really separate. Although Bai Yulan had the special document issued by the Zhong family's old house in her hands, she couldn't just leave after such a violent round of gunfire in the city's rioting district. She needed to wait for Celine's confirmation. The commander of the Westwood Special Forces team looked at the members of Group 7 beside him and could not help but shake his head to dispel the shock in his heart. He walked to the side of the military vehicle and reported the specific details to the higher-ups in the vehicle. The commander of the Westwood Special Forces team, Colonel Lake, sat in the vehicle expressionlessly, but when he heard the 2 names Su Lu and Group 7, he frowned. Earlier, Su Lu, who was wearing a military uniform without epaulets, walked into the restaurant at the intersection under the red light of dusk. The restaurant was already bustling with activity, countless soup pots were boiling with the spicy and exciting smell of life. However, when he glanced around, his gaze fell on a small square table on his right that was slanted to the side of the square window. A middle-aged man in a plain white shirt was sitting at the small table. A dark military uniform was draped over the back of the chair behind him. From the creases of the uniform, he could faintly see stars hidden in them. Even in the square where hundreds of thousands of people gathered, Su Lu would probably see him at first glance and find it hard to look away. The feeling was different from when he saw Du Shaoqing at the base a year ago. The middle-aged man who was immersed in eating at the small table did not give off the feeling of standing proudly in a chaotic world. He was just silent and ordinary, but his pair of white eyebrows, like a sleeping tiger, gave people the feeling that if he raised them, countless people around him would bleed. There were a few tables below the small table by the window, and all of them were military officers of the Westwoods. Their expressions were calm and silent, and they seemed to be eating normally. Only the occasional fierce and vigilant light in their eyes could let people with sharp eyes notice that they were about to use their lives to protect the middle-aged man at the small table at any time. The middle-aged man did not raise his head. His beautiful eyebrows were still, but he naturally exuded a strong sense of oppression. This was probably the aura that had been tempered through years of monstrous power and unparalleled dignity. Su Lu was invited over by phone. He knew who this person was, so he wasn't surprised. However, he was still a little shocked. He secretly assessed that this person was probably the strongest man in the entire Federation other than the war god. But at this time, most of his thoughts were on the two Bermuda experts and the team members who were carrying out the mission, so he didn't have much opportunity to feel anything. Just as he took the first step toward the window, a burst of intense gunshots and explosions suddenly sounded above the restaurant. His footsteps came to an abrupt halt as he looked through the glass toward the source of the sound. Many of the alarmed customers in the restaurant couldn't see that in the middle of an ordinary building about 2 kilometers away, countless gorgeous gunfire suddenly spewed out. Countless smoke and flames broke the glass and spewed out like the tail flames of a fighter jet, surging into the clean evening sky of the West Woods. The loud explosions could still be heard so clearly in the restaurant. It could be imagined how violent and terrifying the gunfight in the building was. Su Li's eyesight was excellent. He could even see that outside the window of the 13th floor of the building, countless bullets were like black dots shuttling back and forth. In the end, their sharpness was worn down by the evil gravitational force. After losing their speed, they turned into countless metal raindrops and fell to the street, hitting the roofs of cars and buildings. The West Woods had the most soldiers and ammunition, but social security had always been good. Such a fierce gunfight in the downtown area was a shocking scene that had not been seen for many years. The diners in the restaurant were terrified. They paid their bills and left. At this time, in a room near the kitchen at the back of the restaurant, a burst of rapid and crisp gunshots rang out. This burst of gunshots was very close and very real. The diners' faces turned pale as they screamed and rushed out. When the gunshots rang out, the West Woods officers surrounding the window suddenly trembled and quickly grasped their respective guns. Su Lu knew that Lan Xiaolong's men had also made a move. His heart suddenly contracted and his body tensed up. The middle-aged man at the small table by the window didn't seem to hear or see any gunfire. His right hand holding the soup spoon didn't tremble at all. He steadily scooped up a spoonful of bright red chili oil soup and gently poured it on the white rice in the black wooden bowl. Su Lu lowered his eyes slightly and took 2 deep breaths to force himself to calm down. He walked toward the small table. The West Woods officers didn't stop him. Instead, they made a path for him. Su Lu stood by the small table and looked at the middle-aged man who was mixing rice with his head down. He could only see the man's thick eyebrows mixed with silver hair. This posture didn't give Su Lu any feeling of looking down on him. Instead, he felt that the man was sitting on a barren mountain, high and far away. The middle-aged man still didn't look up. He carefully mixed the white rice in the black wooden bowl into a bright red stew. He put down the silver spoon, picked up the long chopsticks, and accurately picked up a piece of rat meat from the red chili oil soup and placed it on the rice. He then picked up the rice bowl and began to eat quickly. At the same time, he mumbled one word. Sit. Su Lu pulled out a chair and sat down. Eat. A West Woods officer wearing a colonel epaulet set a set of cutlery in front of Su Lu and quickly brought over a bowl of white rice. Su Lu was only a lieutenant colonel. He immediately stood up and saluted to express his gratitude. Then, he sat down again. He didn't say anything and didn't hesitate at all. He picked up the bowl and chopsticks and began to eat the white rice with the red soup as if he wanted to compete with the middle-aged man across the table in speed. In a very short time, the 2 people at the small table had finished 4 bowls of white rice. The middle-aged man in an ordinary white shirt finally put down the long chopsticks in his hand. He took a wet towel from the colonel beside him, unbuttoned the collar of his shirt, and vigorously wiped the sweat from his forehead due to the spicy food. A soldier has to be able to eat. The middle-aged man raised his head and looked at Sulu. If the stomach is strong enough, you won't get gastritis no matter how fast you eat. If you always have to remember that you have to be as beautiful as a plum blossom, then you shouldn't eat for the rest of your life. Because if you eat, you'll always shit. Sulu wasn't sure if these words were directed at teacher Xiaoqing of the Sonic Federation. He didn't know how to respond, so he could only smile slightly and remain silent. Those subordinates of yours aren't bad. The middle-aged man glanced at the building in the twilight out of the corner of his eye. He looked at the pitch-black marks of the violent surprise attack and said with a carefree smile, "I like people who do things simply and directly." Group 7 had launched a violent attack in the downtown area of the Westwoods Sunset Province according to his own arrangements. Sulu had been worried whether or not the Westwoods would have any opinions. At this moment, when he heard the other party actually express a hint of admiration, he couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. He replied very seriously, "Thank you for the praise, Commander." Hearing the word commander, Zhong Suahu, who had just returned to the rear from the frontline 3320 Fallen Star, was silent for a moment. This commander-in-chief of the Federation, who controlled the military and political power of the entire Westwoods region, turned his head with a slightly complicated expression. Through the transparent glass of the restaurant, he looked at the green trees by the street, as well as the silhouette of the city beyond the treetops even further away. This was his city, his planet, his region. Zhong Suahu's flowery eyebrows raised slightly. There was an undisguised sense of coldness and dominance in his eyes. He didn't look at Sulu as he said in a deep voice, "I'm going to start arresting people." "Is there anyone you want to arrest?" It was the madam's sister who had arranged to have a meal with this big shot in the restaurant. At this time, Sulu still didn't know that apart from the attempt on his life, there was also an attempt on Zhong Suahu's life. So for a moment, he didn't understand why the other party's tone was so gloomy. In the Westwoods region, there were many people involved in this assassination, and most of them were employees of the government system or even the military. Su Li's temperament was cheerful and determined, but he was definitely not Mr. Nice Guy. If someone knocked out his teeth, he would only stuff them into the other party's stomach. He was risking his life on the front lines to kill the enemy, but there were people in the Federation who were cold-bloodedly trying to kill him. How could he let them go? It was just that this matter was indeed a little tricky to deal with. He had originally planned to let Group 7 do the dirty work behind the scenes, returning darkness and cold-bloodedness to darkness and cold-bloodedness. Group 7's subordinates, these experts in darkness, did have this kind of ability, but to let Group 7 participate in the battle against the aristocratic families because of him with no future was really something he didn't want to see. No matter how strong the members' individual combat abilities were, they were still just ordinary people. Group 7 was just a normal combat team from the Shell Motor Company, and this was the Federation that was full of power, order, and dark fog. I have a lot of people I want to arrest. Sulu quickly made a decision. He looked seriously at Zhong Suahu across the table. He didn't think about whether the other party was talking about arrest or assassination. Because no matter which, it was a form of revenge that he could accept. Most importantly, as long as the person this middle-aged man wanted to arrest was in the Westwoods region, no one would be able to escape. Because he was the number one person in the Westwoods. He passed the electronic notebook that he had already sorted out to the other side of the table. Zhong Suahu opened the electronic notebook and silently looked at it for a long time. A slight mocking smile gradually appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, "The old man really spared no effort to train you." There were a lot of people in the electronic notebook, which was information that the Westwoods Military Intelligence Department didn't know. Looking at the call records and evidence, Zhong Suahu was very clear that other than the Bureau of Proclamation, no one could get hold of such top-secret information. Since the attitude of the lady behind Macho's back mountain was to watch silently, then other than the war god of Philadelphia, who could persuade the Bureau of Proclamation to intervene in this murder plan against a lieutenant colonel? Chapter 496. After serious consideration, Sulu finally realized that no matter how hard he considered it, he still could not forcibly suppress that thought. That was why he bravely said these words. However, Commander Zhong did not answer this question, as if he did not hear it at all. His pair of crouching tiger eyebrows were as calm as ever. He waved his hand and summoned a bottle of wine as clear as water, pouring it into the cups of both parties. Zhong Sugu raised his cup and drank it all in one gulp. The wine, as clear as water, was actually as spicy as a knife. When it entered his throat, it turned into a line of fire, cutting wounds all over his body. He frowned, enjoying this feeling of pain and pleasure. Taking a deep breath, he said hoarsely, "Don't be obsessed with who wants to kill you. The key is whether or not you are still alive." It was not clear if this sentence was a certain answer, but Sulu understood. He silently raised the cup of wine, stared at it for a moment, and slowly sipped. He only felt that it was extremely bitter and unbearable. When my father was alive, no one in the Federation dared to touch me because he was alive. If I were to die, he would definitely be furious. His fury would burn on the land of the Federation. Not many people would be able to withstand it. Zhong Sugu continued indifferently, "Just like if I were alive, no one would dare to touch my daughter. This is the same principle. Right now, many people are trying to kill me because if I were to die right now, no one would have the ability to spread the fury of my soul to every corner of the Federation after my death." Zhong Sugu put down the wine cup, raised his chin slightly, and said, "But I once weighed my head with my own hands. It was only 7.5 kilograms. The people of the Empire are the same as us, so our heads are only 7.5 kilograms. I really want to see if there is anyone in this universe who can chop off my 7.5 kilograms. Sulu listened quietly. He roughly understood what the big shot before him wanted to say, but the silence did not last long. He could not help but frown and say, "In the Wood Valley, there seems to have been a problem." In the Wood Valley Manor in the southern suburbs of the capital, there had once been an assassination attempt on Zhong Huiyan's little friend. Commander Zhong narrowed his eyes slightly, picked up the glass of liquor, and drank it in one gulp. He didn't say anything, but a smile appeared on his lips. However, this smile was so cold in the eyes of others. The streets outside the restaurant were quiet and empty. The sky had long been immersed in the color of blue-black ink. At this moment, countless loud noises suddenly came from the direction of the Victory Square of the Sunset State. Beautiful fireworks soared into the sky and bloomed in the night sky like gorgeous flowers that in the Westwood Sunset State. In order to celebrate the victory of a battle at the front line, they generously set off fireworks according to the historical custom of many years. However, under the background of the fireworks that lit up the night sky, not many people noticed the sporadic sounds of gunshots. Amidst these sounds, the sharp sirens that pierced through the streets of the Sunset State capital became somewhat lonely. Following these sharp sirens, countless military vehicles poured out of the Westwoods Military Police Headquarters of the Federation's Westwoods Military Police Headquarters, the Legal Department Building, and the Garrison Division camp directly under the command of the headquarters. All of these military vehicles were filled with armed Westwoods soldiers. Thousands of Westwoods soldiers, divided into countless teams, poured into the Changfeng military base, forcibly entered the underground space of a warehouse in the suburbs, entered the Westwoods Military Police Headquarters of the Federation Investigation Bureau, and completely controlled the Venus Hotel of the Ministry of Defense. In just half an hour, countless units fell under the absolute control of the Westwoods Military Police Headquarters. As time passed, government officials and military officers were taken away from various buildings from time to time because they were involved in a top-secret investigation that had not yet been made public. They were no longer as calm as they used to be. Their hands were tightly tied behind their backs, and their expressions were bleak. Under the tight watch of the Westwoods soldiers, they awkwardly got into military vehicles and were arrested in the dark of the Westwoods military prison. This was a brazen purge launched by the Westwoods Tigers. From the Westwoods Liaison Office of the President's Office to the Westwoods Office of the Ministry of Defense, and then to the Westwoods General Office of the Federation Investigation Bureau. Countless government agencies under the political structure of the Federation were all sternly purged by the Westwoods soldiers. Any government officials and military officers who were suspected of being involved in certain matters, or were suspected of being involved in certain matters, were all knocked to the ground and would not be able to rise again. Zhong Suahu silently looked out of the window and watched the military vehicles whizzing by on the streets. His face was expressionless. He did not care about the angry reaction of the political community of the capital ring, the stern reprimand of President Pabre, the meaningful persuasion of the big shots in the military, and the media reports and the reaction of the so-called people, because he was the real master of this space zone. The moment you walked in, there were also people who wanted to kill me. Have you ever considered the possibility that the two specialists who came to Bermuda, on the surface, wanted to kill you, but perhaps their real target was me? Zhong Suahu picked up the wine glass. His wrist slightly paused, and his left hand threw a peanut into his mouth and gently chewed as he said with a smile. Su Lu was stunned. He began to quickly think about the murder incident that started a few months ago in his mind. He found that there was indeed not much evidence to prove that Commander Zhong's opinion was absurd. Maybe it's just a joke. Zhong Suahu picked up some vegetables with his chopsticks and pressed them into the boiling red soup. He calmly said, "There are many people in the Federation who want me dead. You know very well that I just need an excuse. However, the list you gave me did surprise me a little. It was your contribution that all the rats on this planet were dug out." Su Lu was speechless. He could only shrug like Lan Xiaolong. His eyes fell on the delicate rat meat in the pot of red oil and felt a little strange. At this time, Colonel Lake, who was in charge of the purge operation in the Sunset Province, walked into the restaurant. He came to Zhong Suahu's side and quickly reported the specific results of the operation tonight. Then, he gave a standard military salute and walked out of the door to continue the operation that was bound to last for the whole night. During this process, Colonel Lake did not look at Su Lu because Su Lu kept his head down. Because when he walked into the restaurant, Su Lu, who had a good memory, immediately remembered that day many years ago in Donglin. Those were the experiences, the fists, and the violence that he would never forget in his life. Therefore, he lowered his head and drank silently. Colonel Lake walked out of the restaurant and suddenly stopped under the shadow of the intersection of the street lights and trees. He frowned slightly. He felt that the young man who was eating with the commander was somewhat familiar, and it should be an unforgettable memory in his life. "Who is that person?" "I don't see his epaulets," he asked the subordinate beside him. Zhou Jin, who was carrying a Cayenne machine gun, glanced at the French window of the restaurant and replied, "It's Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu." "That's Su Lu?" Lake asked with a serious expression. "Yes. Back then, he was a squatting soldier in Donglin. He even took the ancient bell back to S1. Zhou Jin shrugged and told the story of the past with a trace of emotion. He said, "It was that relationship. He seemed to have a very close relationship with Mississippi. I heard that he even went to Shisha State once." Colonel Lake was deep in thought. He slowly put on his sunglasses and remained silent. Chapter 497. The red pot was still boiling on the small table next to the glass window. The smooth meat and fresh vegetables were mixed with red oil. Together with a few random side dishes, it was the best dish to go with the wine. A bottle of high-quality wine didn't take long before it was swallowed by Zhong Shouhu and Su Lu. The two of them didn't drink in a heroic manner. They didn't have the awe-inspiring aura of a whale swallowing the sea, but they drank one cup after another. They slowly sipped and kept turning their wrists, and their speed was extremely fast. Zhong Shouhu picked up a wet towel and wiped off the sweat on his face and neck. He unbuttoned 3 buttons on his normal white shirt, but he still seemed to feel that the air was a little stuffy. He raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at the colonel beside him. He then looked at the glass window next to the table and the shade of the trees on the street outside the window. He said, "I want to get some air." The colonel saluted him and waved his hand to summon a few soldiers. They walked out of the restaurant and took out all kinds of tools. Without hesitation, they quickly and neatly removed the entire glass window. The night breeze blew gently on the floor around the stove, and it was slightly wet. Su Lu, who was taking off his military uniform, felt his fingers stiffen. He felt the cool air rushing in and couldn't help but be stunned and speechless. For some reason, deep in his heart, he thought of the arrogant back when he got off the train halfway through the Shanglin Mountain on the Shugang high-speed railway 2 years ago. Much better. Zhong Shouhu sighed softly and lifted the collar of his shirt to fan the night breeze that kept coming in. Seeing the emotion between Su Li's eyebrows that he didn't try to hide, he smiled slightly and said mockingly, "I've been eating in this restaurant for decades. Of course, I won't let the boss lose money." "Little guy, are you going to show your cute sense of justice even for such a small thing?" Su Lu picked up the wine in his cup and drank it all. He grimaced slightly because of the spiciness, and then shrugged to show that he didn't comment. Over the years, he had seen too many privileges appear in the Federation. He wasn't numb yet, but he wasn't surprised either. In the eyes of many people in the Federation, I'm the darkest and most arrogant warlord. I'm the local tyrant of the West Woods who actually took over the Federation and damaged the authority of the government. Zhong Shouhu looked at him expressionlessly and said, "My Zhong family has defended the western border for the Federation for thousands of years, but in the end, we will be cursed for thousands of years. Since I have to bear the infamy, why shouldn't I enjoy the feeling of power? If the Federation wants to station an official, they need my approval. If the Department of Defense wants to draft a battle plan, they need to discuss it with me. I am the Emperor of this galaxy. I am the savior of the people of the West Woods." Sulu understood why this mature big shot sitting across the table would say such self-evaluation in front of him, which went beyond arrogance and bordered on arrogance and stupidity. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that everyone in the hotel, including the professional soldiers from the West Woods who had been protecting him, had already left, leaving only the 2 of them. Based on the firm beliefs of more than 20 years, he quickly retorted subconsciously, "There has never been a savior, nor an immortal emperor." That's right. The Federation has already been free of the imperial system for tens of thousands of years. Zhong Shouhu looked at him with a slightly emotional expression and said with slight mockery, "But everyone knows that the emperor has never disappeared. They just changed a few clothes." George Carlin, the transcript of the conversation after the tea party at the beginning of autumn. Su Lu raised his head and said the source of this famous quote. He had a strange feeling in his heart. He felt that Commander Zhong's words were not referring to himself, but to something else. "I heard that you used to be a squatter in Donglin." Zhong Shouhu looked at him and said with a smile, "If that's the case, you do have some fate with the Zhong family." The real big shots of the Federation seemed to be very good at this kind of method of abruptly changing the focus of the conversation to control the atmosphere of the venue. In the few conversations that Sulu had with the madam in the back of the mountain, he had deeply experienced this kind of headache-inducing communication method, so he did not feel too uncomfortable. He calmly replied, 2 years of maintenance of the mine, what fate? Dong Lin, is that replica of the ancient clock still hanging on Bell Tower Street? Zhong Shouhu drank another cup of wine. The liquid, as hot as fire and as pure as water, entered his body and actually turned into a kind of reminiscence and a very distant heaviness. Hearing the words, Bell Tower Street, Su Li's heart shrank slightly. He stared blankly at the other for a moment and realized that the middle-aged man was only reminiscing about the past and did not seem to be grasping onto his most secret past. He said somewhat hesitantly, "I heard that it's been put in a museum." Yes, after so many years, it can only become a pile of trash in a dark corner of a museum. In this federation, how many people still remember what happened back then? Zhong Shouhu's eyes lowered slightly and said, back then, the 4th Military Region was sent to Donglin to develop a mining planet. The command ship crashed into the main planet of Donglin and turned into a sky full of fireworks. Unfortunately, the ancient clock carried by the commander of the 4th Military Region was not destroyed. When Su Lu heard this, he thought of the clock in front of the square in front of the Zhong family's old house at number 36 Wei 2 district. He thought of the ancient story of Bell Tower Street where he had lived since he was a child. His body could not help but stiffen slightly. He thought of something and understood something. He could not help but feel that the world was really too unpredictable. Zhong Shouhu's beautiful eyebrows raised slightly. He drank another cup of wine and said slowly with a hint of biting coldness, this is a big joke in the history of the Federation. Because according to the investigation of the Federation government later. Oh, the Federation government at that time seemed to be called something like the Bullshit United States. They also had a bullshit management committee. They said that the reason the battleship crashed into the ground was because of a simple gravity calculation error that could not be any simpler. He stared into Su Li's eyes with a cold gaze. Do you think my ancestor would make such a stupid and heartbreaking mistake? Su Lu thought of the main character of this story that he and his orphan companions seemed to often laugh at when he was a child, the commander who left behind a famous quote about fireworks and then left with his tail between his legs. He could not help but feel his lips and tongue become a little dry. But the government thought so, the media thought so, and so did the stupid people who had just broken away from imperial politics and happily threw themselves toward the words like democracy and freedom. Zhong Shouhu said expressionlessly, so the management committee of the Federation took the opportunity to launch a rectification movement within the military. The 4th Military Region was forcibly transferred away from the East Woods district where countless crystal mines had already been discovered and came to the West Woods that was still a piece of uncivilized land at that time. Su Lu lowered his head. The chopsticks in his hand were a little stiff and awkward. He guessed what this big shot wanted to say, but in the depths of his heart, he could not accept it for a while. The origin of the names of the streets in his hometown that he had known since he was a child was actually the fruit of the Federation's dark politics. What gravity calculation error? It's just a conspiracy that countless people participated in. Zhong Shouhu's emotionless words finally proved his guess. History appeared in front of Su Lu in a way that was personally narrated by the descendants of the people involved, but in a completely opposite way. It turned out that the first army to enter the East Woods district was the Zhong family's 4th Military Region. It was also after this incident that the Zhong family was forced to come to the western border of the Federation, and that was how the name of the Zhong family in the West Woods came to be. It turned out that this incident was just a conspiracy of the Federation government. It turned out that the sky was not really blue, and the clouds were not always white. The democratic sages who peacefully overthrew the monarchy and enjoyed great fame in history were not so clean. If this continued, could it be that George Card was really an uncle, and Li Pifu was possibly a woman? Was Schiller really someone in the 5-person team? Were the 2 moons above S1 really the failed products of an alien experiment? Su Lu thought so. He was silent for a long time, drinking 3 glasses of wine in a row, and then asked a question that even he himself thought was stupid. Why? Perhaps the current head of the Zhong family, Zhong Shouhu, had not had the opportunity to tell these stories that happened countless years ago, to tell the Federation people about the humiliation and conspiracy of the family that was once regarded as a warlord, so when he heard this stupid question, Commander Zhong's answer was very calm. Because the elected government that just won the election and successfully forced His Majesty to step down urgently needs an opportunity to weaken the 7 families. Most importantly, the government needs the support of the former royal family. The Federation Crystal Mine Union is the price for this support. The Federation Crystal Mine Union controlled the most basic lifeline of interstellar travel, and was the core and most crucial giant enterprise of the entire Federation. Su Lu lived in the East Woods district. In other words, his family had worked for this giant enterprise for generations. However, until a few years ago, he still thought that he was working for the Federation, like the people of East Woods, until he met a certain distinguished friend. "It's the Tai family," he answered in a deep voice. The Federation government was able to make the Tai royal family peacefully hand over the power in their hands. I never believed that there was no insider trading. The crystal mines on the East Woods mineral planet that are more precious than gold were undoubtedly part of the deal. Zhong Shouhu said expressionlessly. At that time, East Woods had not yet been fully developed. Our Zhong family was the first to enter, and naturally, we were the ones that had to be sacrificed. Su Lu had never had any good feelings about the political circle, but as an orphan born at the bottom of the Federation, he always habitually stood on the side of the elected government, and did not have much good feelings about the 7 families hidden behind history. After a moment of silence, he said somewhat unnaturally, "But a privileged class like the Zhong family is not a good thing for the Federation to begin with. Could it be that those pig-headed politicians who only know how to compromise and exchange benefits, who only know how to wave their arms and use beautiful but illusory words to incite the stupid people, who slammed the table and scolded us while secretly taking our money and playing with the women we gave them, are a good thing for the Federation?" This was the problem of the lack of system and monitoring, but the system itself was much better than the 7 families or the political system of the dynasty even further away. Even if the stupid people's choices were very stupid, and even if the people they chose were very sad, they were only allowed to choose, but they still had some right to choose. Su Lu wanted to refute the other, but when he thought of his experience after escaping to the capital ring and the strange stories that the uncle had experienced, he lost the will to refute the other. "Now, you are the highest commander of the Federation's frontline. President Pabre has always given you the most selfless support, bearing the strong pressure from the parliament and the political circle. As far as I know, the Department of Defense has never interfered with your command in any details." He said, "That is all history. Forgetting history means betrayal, not to mention that history is now." When the dynasty ended, the Federation government and the 7 families shared the benefits equally. Only the Zhong family was chased out of the rich capital ring and stationed in the barren East Woods. When they discovered the treasure in East Woods, we were chased out of East Woods by such a despicable and disgusting scheme and came to the barren West Woods. Now that we are about to attack the Empire, the West Woods will be the Federation's most important native region. Where is the Federation going to chase the Zhong family? I named the girl Zhong Huiyan because I want her to remember what this newborn Federation did to the Zhong family many years ago. Child, you have to be alert. This Federation will continue to do such things to us in the future. Su Lu thought of the cute little watermelon, the weight that she might have to bear on her thin shoulders in the future, and the origin of her name. He could not help but silently say the words that had been passed down in his hometown by the ancestors of the Zhong family after the warship crashed. "My mood right now is lonelier than fireworks." The Federation wants to destroy the Zhong family, and they are trying to destroy the Zhong family right now, just like the warship that exploded into fireworks years ago. Zhong Shouhu raised his eyebrows slightly and said calmly, "I look forward to it." Chapter 498. In the face of a major event that could happen, in the face of the overall will of the politicians and the people, and in the face of a historical trend that went against everything, the fact that the head of an aristocratic family who was behind the times could so calmly and provocatively say the words, "I am looking forward to it," was incomparably fierce. Su Lu had seen many people who acted arrogantly and had extraordinary free and easy temperaments. For example, Lin Banshan, who broke out of his family and treated the tradition of aristocratic families like broken shoes and built a good place for himself in the Jianghu. For example, the madam who hid behind the curtain and made waves in the Federation. For example, the uncle who dared to fight to the death against the glory of the charter. However, after hearing these words, he was still fiercely shocked. The tone of the tiger of the West Woods was very calm. He was not arrogant, but indifferent. However, there was an unquestionable confidence that came from his bones. Where did this arrogance and free and easy come from? Absolute power leads to absolute authority. Su Lu silently thought of this sentence. He was somewhat moved by the middle-aged man's temperament, but he did not think that what he revealed would really be the history that was about to happen. According to the logical judgment of his engineer mind, he did not think that the Federation would make a move against the Zhong family again. This was because it did not fit the current situation. The war between the Federation and the Empire burned like wildfire and would probably invade the Empire's space next year. In recent constitutional years, the Federation government and the 7 major families had always carefully maintained a certain balance and harmony. How could they be the first to instigate internal strife in the Federation before the Great War? It had to be known that the Zhong family of the West Woods was an extremely important part of the Federation's strategy. In this part, stability was always the overriding political need. He spoke frankly of his judgment. After a moment of silence, Zhong Suahu, who was drinking and eating, replied with a smile, "Our family is always different from the other 6 families." Was it because the Zhong family had always held military power in their hands? Su Lu sank into a certain kind of thinking that he was not good at. "I've always had a good impression of Mr. President. Although I'm in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I'll never be able to be like those shameless government officials in the remote Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'll never be able to show admiration on my face like a mistress looking at her lover." There was still no expression on Zhong Shouhu's face as he said, "The government of the Federation is not the embodiment of the collective will of the people, nor is it the embodiment of the will of an excellent politician who is born with a small probability. Instead, it is the embodiment of the collective will of a large group of people who have vested interests in the government. The bureaucrats and businessmen who control the media and finance, who are good at manipulating elections and instigating public opinion, are the mainstream of the Federation. No matter how clear-headed and calm President Pabre is, he is only one person. At most, he can influence the people around him or the young students in Linhai province, but he doesn't have the power to change the direction of the Federation's history. I can even be sure that once he tries to change these things, he will immediately step down." Zhong Shouhu looked at Su Lu with a faint and mocking expression, as if he was looking at the young students in Linhai province who were full of a sense of justice but could not find a specific solution. Su Lu thought of the role played by Ma Chou in the last presidential election, the role played by Shi Qinghai and himself, and the dark deals and disputes behind the scenes of the election. He could not help but fall silent and acquiesce to Commander Zhong's opinion. Suddenly, he was a little worried about the president in the capital ring, because he knew that the president with a dark complexion was not a politician who was willing to go with the flow. That's all for these matters. Zhong Shouhu rubbed the wine glass with 3 fingers and said directly, "Next, we can talk about the increase of the military's right to speak in the Federation's political structure with the appearance of the Imperium, and the necessity of dispersing the military." Su Lu was already very used to the rhythm of the conversation between big shots like Commander Zhong. He was used to them rudely and straightforwardly ending a topic and starting a new one. However, when he heard this series of questions with a strong academic tone, his face naturally flashed with a stunned and depressed expression. Zhong Shouhu looked at him mockingly, drank the wine, and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "This is a joke." "Oh." Su Lu shrugged and quickly replied, "Maybe the central computer can hear it." "This is a very cold joke." Zhong Shouhu raised his eyebrows and said, "2 soldiers with a huge difference in status, age, and experience were having a late-night conversation with red soup, tender meat, and strong wine." Regardless of whether the joke was cold or not, the conversation continued. The most wonderful thing was that both parties seemed to be somewhat comfortable in the conversation. Commander Zhong was the son of an aristocratic family and a top student in the first military academy of the Federation. When he grew up, he led millions of troops on the western border of the Federation and fought against the Imperium alone for more than 10 years. His life experience was very rich, and his words were naturally powerful. Su Lu was an orphan of the miners in Donglin. He had only completed 6.5 years of national education. His dream in life was to work with machines, but his life was quite exciting. Plus, his uncle had once forced him to read silently in the university library for several years, so he could be considered a scholar. Most importantly, his temperament destined him to be an excellent listener. For example, Zhou Yu, Shi Qinghai, and Jian Shui'er had already proven that. The topic moved away from the heavy politics and conspiracies to the folklore of the various regions of the Federation, the people, the history of literature, Schiller's plays, and the eccentricities of George Carlin. Suddenly, the conversation became much more relaxed. Su Lu listened with great interest to the middle-aged man across the table with a trace of domineering criticism and criticism. From time to time, he would add in a few words. It was really like two scholars holding a glass of wine and talking about what difficult books they had recently read. The night gradually deepened. The pot of red soup had not yet dried up, and the fireworks outside the window had long since stopped. Only the slightly cold wind kept blowing through the pitiful glass that no longer existed, brushing against the two people's faces and arms. In the end, the topic naturally moved to the matter that concerned the entire universe the most at present, and that was the war. The two men's voices did not become passionate because of the alcohol and the life and death on the front line. They calmly and seriously discussed the war on the 3 fallen planets. One talked about the type of formation he had commanded more than 90 divisions to surround the 3,320 planet. Another talked about how he had led a small team to cross a small river. Another talked about the strategic intentions of the Federation that had been planned for a long time and analyzed how the Emperor of the Empire would respond. Another talked about how he had drilled the recruits in the barracks, wondering if this would annoy their old father. Like the morning sun and the morning dew, like the emperor and the farmer, the difference in status between Zhong Shouhu and Su Lu was too great. The level of the topics they talked about was too great. But strangely, because of a very delightful mood, Su Lu was not willing to be a listener. Instead, he earnestly shared his own views. Su Lu was very excited to have the honor of discussing the macro and details of the war with Commander Zhong. He was able to look at many things in the past year from a different perspective. It was a very rare opportunity to listen to the powerful commander-in-chief of the Federation talk about the intentions of the commanders in space with the tone of a commander. Zhong Shouhu, the legendary warlord, the local tyrant of the West Woods who killed without blinking an eye and ignored the laws of the Federation, was not as cold and terrifying as the people of the Federation thought. Instead, he was more like a young scholar who was thin enough to live in a cramped university dormitory. He was angry because he did not achieve what he wanted and did not have a girlfriend. Su Lu stared with his somewhat drunken eyes, holding the wine glass tightly, trying to catch every word in his ears. Such a clear thought appeared in his mind, and he knew that this would be a conversation that he would remember for the rest of his life. Perhaps it was because he had drunk too much wine, but Su Lu somewhat inappropriately mentioned the illustrious achievements of the Iron 7th Division on planet 5460. It was because he had drunk too much that the cold and arrogant Commander Zhong did not care that the boy opposite him was obviously poking at his sore spot. He said indifferently, "Du Shaoqing is a smarter pig." Su Lu lowered his head, held back a bitter smile, and quickly drank a glass of wine. If the Imperium can't break through the 2 warp holes in a day, they will have to drift in the universe for 6 or 7 years before they can reach the West Woods if they want to attack the homeland of the Federation. The Federal Army is more advanced than the Imperium's bastards from head to toe. They are waiting for the enemy to arrive. How can they not win? The Imperial Expeditionary Force is just a bunch of tired bastards who came from afar with a few crappy guns from 6 or 7 years ago in their hands. No matter who is on the front line, if they can't win against the enemy, then they are stupid pigs. Commander Zhong looked at Su Lu and said, "Even if you are in command of the Iron 7th Division, you can still win." Su Lu raised his head and subconsciously touched his nose. He could not help but sigh softly when he did not notice the ugliness of the two holes facing the sky. He had no reason to like Du Shaoqing and the Iron 7th Division, but when he thought of the fierce battle he saw on the front line and the heroic achievements of the Iron 7th Division, he felt that Commander Zhong's evaluation was a bit unfair. After a moment of silence, he said, "The Iron 7th Division advanced the fastest on planet 5460. In fact, the Imperial Expeditionary Force has been in the West Woods for decades. Not many people can defeat them so quickly." If the transfer of the Iron 7th Division to the front line was the most troublesome thing for Commander Zhong, then the fact that Su Lu mentioned was the heaviest part in the hearts of all the soldiers and people in the West Woods. Zhong Suahu was not angry. He said calmly, "The people of the capital ring have always complained about the West Woods. They think that we have not driven the Imperial Expeditionary Force out of the West Woods in the past 10 years because the West Woods military district has failed in its duty on the battlefield." Su Lu seriously looked forward to the other's answer. "We have indeed not done everything we can to liberate the 3 fallen star systems." A complicated emotion appeared on Zhong Suahu's face. There was a bone-chilling coldness in his mockery. "In the West Woods, from me to the most common homeless man on the street corner, we are not willing to sacrifice too much for the Federation, or to be precise, for the slogan of the capital ring. This is not because we want to hide any real strength, but because, from the moment the Empire invaded, we have been the ones sacrificing. When the Empire came, it was the men of the West Woods who were fighting. The Empire was crippled, but the Federation was not willing to support us to win the final victory. Because there is an old man who thinks that the Federation needs to keep those bastards of the Empire to train his troops. So the Federation resolutely and coldly carried out the West Woods strategy of taking turns to fight for more than 10 years. Zhong Suahu looked at him. There was a faint storm in his calm eyes. He said word by word, taking turns to fight on the land of the West Woods people. This, based on what? Hearing the words, old man, Su Lu was shocked into silence. He did not know what to say. Chapter 499. There was an old man on the shore of Lake Feicheng. Everyone in the Federation, from the president to the street vendors, was used to calling him old man with great respect and affection. The uncle in the mine pit, who was chewing wild beef with red wine, disdainfully called him old man. Su Lu had also called him old man before, but it did not mean that he had the confidence and qualifications to ignore this person's brilliance. Old man. There was actually someone in this universe who dared to call the god of war so indifferently and mockingly? Su Lu did not hide the shock in his eyes as he stared at Zhong Sugu across the table. Zhong Sugu was, in a sense, the most powerful person in the West Woods, and the god of war Li Pifu that he coldly mentioned earlier was undoubtedly the most powerful person in the Federation. This had nothing to do with the political system. It was purely a manifestation of the people's fanatical worship and the military's will, even in the West Woods. However, Zhong Sugu said so with a trace of unwillingness and coldness. The Federation's god of war Li Pifu did not hesitate to use the West Woods as a training ground to deliberately keep the remaining Imperial Expeditionary Force in the West Woods in order to plan for the space war that would span across several constitutional calendars. He deliberately let the Federal Army, who was in a temporarily peaceful era, constantly smell the smell of blood and smoke, get used to the cruelty of war, and improve the combat power of the troops. This was a strategic arrangement that was easy to guess. It was even a state that many people in the upper echelons of the Federation were aware of. However, what was a little cold was that in the past 10 years, no one in the Federation had made any comments about this, even if they knew how unfair and cold-blooded this strategic arrangement was to the citizens of the Fallen Star and to the entire West Woods region. It was the same for Su Lu. When he heard the middle-aged man across the table disdainfully call him an old man, his mind buzzed as he remembered the fact that he should have understood a long time ago. He accepted the Federation's strategy that Federation youths like him had been deliberately forgetting. A hint of sincere shame appeared in his heart, and then he fell silent. His outlook on life was not like those old people who disdained and hated. There was only black and white, day and night, light and darkness, a clear flag, tenacious and cold. In fact, he was very clear that there were always all kinds of unavoidable situations in the world, and there were always gray areas. It was only when the gray shadows crossed his bottom line that he reacted violently. War god Li Pifu and the Federation government sacrificed the peace of the entire West Woods region to continuously wear down the Empire's endless and costly expeditions and will. In order to maintain the vigilance of the entire Federation and the combat strength of the entire Federal forces, it was a cold-blooded but strategically correct plan. For the future of the entire Federation and the sustainable development of the entire race in this universe, there was no other word to describe such a strategic plan other than brilliant. Su Lu once thought so too. He did not think that the old man's consideration was wrong, but now that he was in the West Woods, surrounded by the West Woods citizens who were tired and even numb from decades of war, and had just returned from the front line filled with the smell of blood and the deserted graves of the early residents of the fallen star, he realized that the people of the West Woods definitely did not think so. Since the beginning of the constitutional era, the West Woods have been at war together. The flames of war have never truly subsided, but there has never been a day when the flames of war burned into the fields and manors of the people of the capital ring. All men of the West Woods have to go through the harshest test of life on the battlefield. In the 3 generations of the Zhong family, more than 100 direct and collateral descendants have died because of this, not to mention the ordinary West Woods citizens. The owner of this restaurant was originally a brother of 4, but he is the only one who can come back alive from the battlefield. Zhong Shouhu's voice became extraordinarily faint, like a cup of coffee that had been mixed with countless cups of water. There was a subtle but unpleasant taste to it. You and I are professional soldiers, guarding the land and protecting the people, serving the Federation, and dying on the battlefield is only natural, but why do we, the people of the West Woods, have to bear the pain of dying generation after generation? The most shameful thing is that it would be fine if we really beat them down. With the bravery of the men of the West Woods, do you think we can't chase those bastards of the Empire out of the planetary system? But, the people of the capital ring aren't willing. Zhong Shouhu's lips curled into a deep mocking smile, but it was not clear if he was mocking himself for backing down back then. He said, war requires logistics and resources, not just the money and love donated by the people of the Upper Woods. Those can buy a good life, but they can't buy true victory. The Federation government doesn't give us these, and we have a serious shortage of energy supply. How can we fight? He looked at Su Li's slightly lowered eyes and said in a low voice, in the end, the government is still worried about feeding bandits through war. Continuous aid will fatten the Zhong family, the biggest, most arrogant, and most shameless warlord in the universe. Especially that bullshit round robin. Zhong Shouhu's eyes narrowed, and coldness gradually filled his eyes. When people are going to die in a tough battle, it will be the people of the West Woods who will go up. The people of the capital ring are like the audience of a play. They will occasionally go on stage and play a few roles, but when the curtain ends, they will have to stand in the middle of the actors and accept Mr. President's handshake and kind reward. Is this fair to the people of the West Woods? Su Lu, who had been silent for a long time, clenched his fists slightly and said in a slightly hoarse voice, but the old man's strategic plan is not wrong. After all, this is for the Federation. If it's for the Federation, then who will care about the life and death of the people of the West Woods? Zhong Shouhu looked at him silently. The people of the West Woods are like the orphans of the Federation. They are wandering in the universe, singing sad songs in the west wind. In the end, they can only receive some charity from kind-hearted people. Su Lu suddenly thought of the folk song of the West Woods that he learned on Planet 163, and a faint sense of frustration and sadness grew in his heart. He realized that it was indeed difficult for him to sort out these complicated things with his thinking ability. The night wind blew in through the window, and the red soup froze slightly. The atmosphere around the wine table also fell into a frozen silence until Zhong Shouhu smiled and picked up the wine cup to break the awkwardness. He said calmly, "Let's stop the boring topic and change to something more cheerful." "Like what?" Su Luo was somewhat depressed, and it was difficult for him to immediately cheer up with the rhythm of Zhong Shouhu's words. "Like Du Shaoqing, who once suffered a great loss at your hands. Like you, he is a hero of the Federation deliberately cultivated by the old man and the Federation government. If I say that he is just a slightly smarter pig, would you have a problem with that?" Su Lu smiled bitterly and said, "I don't have a problem with that. I even agree with Uncle Tian's evaluation of teacher Shaoqing. He is a snowboard demon. You don't have to flatter me. Although I have always thought that Big Stick Tian beating up Du Shaoqing was definitely in the top 3 of the funniest things I have ever seen in my life." Zhong Shouhu laughed 3 times and suddenly stopped smiling. He said solemnly, "But Du Shaoqing is indeed smart. In Academy 1, my grades are not as good as his. I suppressed him to the point that he was not allowed to enter the front lines of the West Woods for 10 years. The Capital Ring and the Department of Defense have a lot of opinions. Do you also think that I am a jealous person?" "I don't know." Su Lu answered honestly. "Actually, the reason is very simple. Although I am known as the biggest warlord in the Federation, I am also a citizen of the Federation who grew up in a democratic system. Of course, above that, I am also a citizen of the West Woods." Zhong Shouhu looked at him and said calmly, "So as long as I am alive, I will do whatever it takes to suppress Du Shaoqing and the soldiers he represents." Su Lu looked at him in a daze, not understanding what he meant. "Du Shaoqing likes to dress up as the plum blossoms in the snow. He dresses himself up as the most standard professional soldier in the universe. His life goal is to become the second Li Pifu." Zhong Shouhu said with slight mockery, "But don't forget that the plum blossoms in the snow are as red as blood. Underneath this person's coldness is the most fanatical heart. I have always remembered that this person once said in a strategy seminar in school. In order to defeat the empire, which has the power of an entire nation, the Federation government needs to be stronger, and the Federation's political structure needs to be more efficient and concise. If such a hardline military officer is allowed to step onto the stage of the Federation, how will the people of the West Woods live? But that's not the key point. The key point is that from that moment on, I've always felt that there's a very dangerous trend within the Federation, or more precisely, within the military. Some people have a strong desire to change the government system." Su Lu wanted to say that he was a typical example of a soldier interfering in politics, but he quickly gulped down a mouthful of wine and almost choked. Zhong Shouhu looked at the night trees outside the window with a serious expression and said in a low voice, "If a military government appears in the Federation, what will become of this world?" Hearing the words military government, Su Li's eyes gradually narrowed. This term was very unfamiliar, but for some reason, he felt that the hair on the back of his neck was standing on end because of some kind of chill. His brain worked quickly. The introduction of the military government in the dictionary and the absurd interpretation of several of Master Schiller's plays gradually became clear. "Impossible," he said firmly. "The Federation has the Bureau of Proclamation. It is impossible for a deformed monster like the military government to appear." "Is that so?" Zhong Shouhu raised his beautiful eyebrows slightly and said slowly, "There was also the Bureau of Proclamation during the Dynasty era. How did His Majesty step down from the Dragon Throne? The glory of the Charter has never been a staunch defender of the Federation's political system. I think that the Bureau of Proclamation will only be a bystander in these aspects." "Evidence. This kind of thing requires evidence." Su Lu felt a strong sense of danger. He grew up in a democratic society. Although he had experienced the hypocrisy and weakness of the Federation's political system countless times, and he had even done many things that were completely contrary to the spirit of the system, in the bottom of his heart, he still had a childlike stubbornness and naivety. He couldn't accept that the Federation that he loved so much would have a terrifying future where soldiers controlled the will of the people with guns in their hands. At this moment, he thought of the assassination in the underground stadium of Linhai. Deputy Minister of National Defense Yang Jingsong and the young officers of the 2nd Military Region, in order to maintain the so-called glory of the military, did not hesitate to use military mechas to launch a shameful attack on a citizen of the Federation. Many images flashed through his mind, overlapping and gradually becoming heavier. However, whether it was the information given by the old man or some of the things he knew, he couldn't persuade him to add such a serious accusation to Du Shaoqing, even if he didn't like this cold Major General. "What evidence did you have before you killed Macklin?" Zhong Shouhu asked coldly. Chapter 500. Unlike the approach often used in dramas, after hearing this sentence, Su Lu did not remain silent in shock and reflect on himself. In the end, he shamefully came to a conclusion. Instead, he furrowed his eyebrows that were as thick as ink and as straight as knives and said very seriously, "One of my brothers has already obtained evidence that Medellin was involved in the terrorist attack, and we handed it over to the Federation." However, the Federation's laws had already lost their effect at that time, so I had to do it myself. And before I killed Medellin, I asked him myself, and he admitted it. Zhong Sugu's cold question was meant to go straight to Su Li's heart and reveal the murderous intent hidden in this young man's heart to refute his questioning of evidence. However, he never expected that Su Lu, who was sitting across the table, would actually respond very seriously like a law student, like a stubborn and serious child. This was a very clever young man. Zhong Sugu quietly looked at Su Lu and became even more certain of his opinion. He said self-deprecatingly, "You're right, I don't have evidence. In fact, if I had evidence, I would have sent someone to kill Du Shaoqing a long time ago." The West Woods commander raised his eyebrows and said with a bit of coldness, "I respect your ideas in certain aspects of self-hypnosis, but I still want to remind you that when your President Pabre is ousted by the military officers in the future, remember our conversation today." "Your president." Since the last election, Su Lu seemed to have heard this saying on many occasions. However, because of the different occasions, the meaning of this saying was very different. Mr. Shi said this because he was proud of himself for influencing the Federation's presidential election, but Zhong Sugu's words represented the unanimous opinion of many of the big shots in the Federation's upper echelons. In their view, the president had pardoned Su Lu and spared no effort to cultivate this person with the military. Naturally, he had some expectations. In the future political landscape of the Federation, His Excellency the President, the 7 great families, and the bureaucrats and politicians would undoubtedly have many conflicts of interest, and Su Lu would definitely stand on the side of President Pabre. The excellent impression he had of the president in the past years, the extraordinary political integrity and decisiveness that the Federation politician had demonstrated during the Medellin incident, the few but very deep interactions they had in the past 2 years, listening to his words, observing his actions, and eating the stewed potatoes cooked by the First Lady herself. Su Lu knew that he had already been branded with the faint mark of an official residence, but he did not reject it. Instead, he felt honored. Listening to Commander Zhong's sarcastic words, the crazy picture of Mr. President being aimed at by countless gun barrels appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He raised his eyebrows and said, "There is no evidence or even evidence. Just because of a scene in school that year, you want to put teacher Shaoqing into the ranks of fanatical officers. Although I also hate this guy, this is too ridiculous." Zhong Shouhu frowned and waved his hand. "That makes sense. Is it because he wanted to steal my wife back then?" Su Lu was stunned and speechless. Since the commander-in-chief of the Federation had already changed the topic to what happened in the first military academy back then, it was naturally not convenient for him to say anything. Zhong Shouhu slightly raised his chin and said unruly, "I hate Du Shaoqing very much, so I will crush him for the rest of his life." A mere major general, and yet a division commander uses a lieutenant colonel as his attendant. I will use a colonel. As long as I am alive, I can only be the commander-in-chief of the front line. I have suppressed him for 10 years. Even if I die, he will have to endure for a long time before he can reach my current position. The most important point is that the Federation wants his Iron 7th Division to show its fierce side on the front line. I will definitely let the entire Federation know who is the real fierce one on the battlefield. Is this a child's fit of pique? Sulu opened his eyes wide and asked in a serious and joking tone. This question that seems interesting to me but seems boring and childish to you ends here. Zhong Shouhu no longer paid attention to Su Li's rare rich facial expression. He opened the third bottle of wine on the table and poured himself a cup. Then he asked thoughtfully, one last question. When do you think the war between the Federation and the Empire will truly end? Hearing this question, Su Li slowly straightened his sweaty body and looked at the other party in surprise. How could a war that had lasted for almost 100 years end? This was a question that seemed to be more macro and complicated than the universe. Facing the hundreds of millions of vicious and cruel invaders of the Empire and facing the crazy and warlike Emperor of the Empire, even though the Federation had always held the strategic initiative, no one dared to say when this war would end or how it would end. He had learned a lot about quantum physics from Professor Shen, and he had also been exposed to astrophysics before. He knew a lot about this materialistic world. However, when he heard this question, he still felt that Commander Zhong was probably too drunk to discuss what should have been discussed in the Federation's joint staff meeting with a lieutenant colonel like him. Zhong Suahu looked at him with interest, waiting for his answer. Under this kind of gaze, Sulu had no choice but to think very seriously and give an absolutely sincere answer. Only after the Empire is driven out of the West Woods, and then the Federation forces enter the Empire's space sector and annihilate its basic forces, will the Empire suffer so much that they will never dare to start a war again. Only then can the Federation achieve true peace. Naive. Commander Zhong immediately commented without holding back. Su Lu scratched his head. He knew that this idea was naive, but after the catastrophe, the Federation had been living and developing in this universe peacefully. Except for the pirates in Bermuda, they had never encountered any real war. In Schiller's script, all wars will end at some point. Those mythical kingdoms have fought absurdly for more than 600 years for a rose, but the war will eventually come to an end. That's a drama. Zhong Shouhu corrected him without holding back. Even if Schiller's description is something that really happened in history, it can't be used as a model. Don't forget that in those ridiculous Knights' Wars, the nobles on both sides only need to spend some gold coins to return to their hometowns. The ones who died were all farmers and hunters of the lower class. And the war between the Federation and the Empire is a war between races. Even prisoners of war rarely appear. From top to bottom, how many people have died and how much blood has been shed? Most importantly, our great war god of the Federation once killed their emperor with his own hands. So what? Su Lu looked at him in confusion. The emperor of the empire maintains his rule because of the purity of his bloodline and the legitimacy of the so-called continuity of power. Whether it's the crazy emperor now or the future emperor of the empire, because of these factors, they will definitely avenge the former emperor who died at the hands of Li Pifu. This is the so-called blood feud. You can also call it the vengeance of the world. Today, there are many problems within the empire. The royal family and nobles can still hypnotize those lowly soldiers to charge into the West Woods without any regard for their lives. It's because of the absolute correctness represented by the flame of vengeance. And then? Su Lu listened carefully. This war will end unless the Federation destroys the empire. But our system can't copy the British and rear their people like pigs and dogs, because in our society there is always the so-called universal humanitarian bullshit that doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. So the empire's people will rebel, and we will continue to kill the empire's people until they are all killed. Or the empire will destroy the Federation and drown us in a warm water tank like fish. Other than these two situations, are there no other possibilities? Sulu asked, scratching his head. Yes. Zhong Suahu looked at the hopeful expression on his face and said mockingly, the Federation will immediately admit defeat and submit to us. Then, they will strip the war god naked, tie him up, and send him to the Empire's Tianjing planet for the Empire's Emperor to hack into pieces. Sulu waved his hand in annoyance, indicating that this cold joke wasn't funny. With your intelligence, you should be able to tell that this is a joke. Zhong Shouhu continued his unrestrained mockery. Everyone in the Federation knows that this is a joke. The government and the military know better than anyone how difficult it is to end this war. They know that although the Federation is much better than the Empire in terms of economic and technological strength, to truly and completely destroy the Empire and bring peace to the Federation, a more powerful and efficient government is very much needed. But because the positions of the government and the military are different, they cast their thoughts in two different directions to solve this problem. Some people in the military believe that the Federation needs wartime control and establish a military government to make the media, the public, and those mercenary giant corporations behave and speak less loudly. You're back to square one again, Sulu said with a shrug. Zhong Shouhu ignored him and continued, and the hardliners in the government believe that a powerful and efficient government capable of winning this war must dig out the abscess in the body of the Federation from its roots. That is, the 7 great families who have been standing in the shadows and watching coldly from the sidelines. Especially in the West Woods, the Federation government must have absolute control over this star sector. To control the Zhong family, they must eliminate me, which is why today's murder occurred. I admit that your analysis is very reasonable, but I want to remind you that the target of the assassination was me. Even if I was just a cover, I still can't believe it. If the mastermind behind this is the Federation government, why would they be so petty in their actions today? This is far from your reputation as the tiger of the West Woods, Sulu analyzed seriously. I have the same feeling, Zhong Shouhu said with a smile. In this part of the universe, if they really want to kill me, the Federation government must send an army over. But I'm really curious, with so many pairs of eyes watching, who would dare to send an army to kill me, the commander-in-chief of the front lines? After drinking, the two people at the table discussed the general trend of the universe in their drunkenness. Being blown by the night wind of the sunset state, they felt a bit happy. While Sulu was thinking silently, Zhong Shouhu had already stood up, picked up the general's uniform from the back of the chair, and put it on his shoulders carelessly. He staggered and prepared to leave. Sulu stood up to see him off and asked seriously, "Why are you telling me this?" Zhong Shouhu turned sideways, stared at the young man's honest and sincere face, and said, "Because you are Sulu." Sulu said, "I still don't understand." Zhong Shouhu held the general's uniform and was silent for a moment. His beautiful eyebrows raised slightly, and he said with a smile, "Because I admire you, a rare young man in the Federation, a silent rock. Although I am the commander-in-chief of the former enemy of the Federation, I am also in the mood to chat. It's just that I can't find anyone to talk to about these things." This is a pretty good explanation, Sulu thought in his heart. However, he couldn't help but feel that this conversation by the window and the pot was hiding a bit of autumn sadness. He didn't know if it was because Silan was an orphan or because of the shadowy political reality that made him think this way. "I also admire you very much." He thought of the little girl in S1 Shishya state and suddenly asked in a suppressed voice, "But aren't you entrusting me to someone else?" Zhong Shouhu was startled, and then he laughed with incomparable arrogance. "Don't overestimate yourself, and don't underestimate the strength of a family that has survived for tens of thousands of years in the universe. Especially, don't underestimate me." Sulu rubbed his nose somewhat awkwardly. He suddenly raised his head and said, "At the beginning, I said that your nephew was involved in this murder." Zhong Shouhu looked at him with a strange expression. He had probably never seen such a stubborn and unyielding young man in his life. He extended a finger and said seriously, "This time, it's you who has come back. Su Lu tacitly agreed. How is your relationship with my daughter? Zhong Shouhu asked. Su Lu saw the watermelon-skinned black hair that rippled with his movements. He said seriously, like brother and sister. There are too many juniors in the family. If my nephew isn't a bastard, what will happen to my daughter in the future? What will happen if I die? Do I really have to entrust you to someone else? Zhong Shouhu looked at him calmly, then reached across the table and rudely rubbed Su Li's hair like an elder. Then he turned and left, his back showing the vicissitudes of life. Zhong Ziki was involved in the murder case this time. With Su Lei's temperament of forcing the enemy to swallow him down, he would definitely not let it go just like that. Whether it was through legal means or official channels, he would make the other party pay the price, even if he was the most beloved nephew of Tiger Shilin. But before Zhong Shouhu left, he asked him about his relationship with Little Watermelon and asked him what he should do. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured into Su Li's drunken head. Su Lu suddenly became incomparably sober. He finally understood why a person like Tiger Shilin would have an idiot like Zhong Ziki as his successor. A deep chill towards aristocratic family schemes took over his entire body. Walking out of the restaurant, Su Lu looked at the convoy disappearing in the direction of Latitude 2 district and couldn't help but shake his head. Without the accompaniment of liquor and red soup pot, the night wind in Sunset Province was a little cold. He immediately fastened the collar of his military uniform. The black car drove over like a ghost. Su Lu opened the door and sat in. He quietly listened to Bai Yulan describe the specific details of the mission and sincerely thanked her. The 7 groups of military vehicles that had been waiting for a long time also followed, closely surrounding the black car. They vigilantly started and drove toward the camp. Looking at the scene that he had long been accustomed to through the glass, Su Lu suddenly realized that he was no longer the poor mining orphan, nor was he the little gatekeeper of Yue University, nor was he the engineer who took the high-speed rail between the capital and Hong Kong. Although he was only a young lieutenant colonel, he already had a certain amount of influence in the Federation. He could even drink and chat with a legendary figure like Zhong Shouhu all night long. This conversation was extremely important to him. He, who was more familiar with machines and firearms, had never had enough acumen to see clearly the foggy political side of the Federation. Tonight, Zhong Shouhu's seemingly casual discussion made him suddenly see the light and understand many things. These and the last sentence made Su Lu feel that this tiger of the West Woods was indeed not an ordinary person, and he was definitely not someone he could compare to. Commander Zhong, whose words and actions could influence the general trend of the universe, had a way of thinking and perspective that was so sharp and profound. He even naturally had a thought. Zhong Shouhu and Du Shaoqing were known as lifelong enemies by many busybodies. However, looking at it today, how could Du Shaoqing defeat such a seemingly poor and pedantic person who was actually cold and sharp? After the fireworks tonight, clouds slowly moved in from the east, covering the stars above the clear atmosphere. Outside the window, the streets of Sunset State became darker and blurrier. Su Lu tilted his head and looked out of the window like a statue. He was silent for a long time. He did not agree with some of Commander Zhong's assertions because there was no actual evidence. However, some of the things he had experienced in the past 2 years made him faintly feel that a dangerous thought was indeed emerging among the young officers of the Federation. This thought had not surfaced, but was only fermenting and brewing. Want to establish a military government? There was no such possibility in the Federation. After a long period of serious consideration, based on the clear logical thinking of engineers, understanding of the political structure of the Federation, and the 700,000-word First Charter, Su Lu made his own judgment. He sighed in relief, and his admiration for Zhong Shouhu grew even stronger. As the top of the privileged class in the Federation, the lonely tiger of the West Woods, this person was worried about the future of the Federation and sincerely protected the system of the Federation. How could he not be admirable? He thought of his friend Tai Ziyuan, who seemed to have the same excellent qualities. It seemed that there were good people in the 7 great families. It was just that Tai Ziyuan always had the bad aura of a crown prince. Sigh, young people, Su Lu sighed and shook his head. With the end of the arrest in Sunset State, the murder case officially came to an end. The Westwoods military took this opportunity to purge the people planted by various factions in the capital ring on the main planet. A total of more than 70 suspects were arrested and were awaiting trial. Among these arrested suspects, more than 50 people belonged to the relevant departments of the government. The Zhong family of the Westwoods sent the most powerful warning to the people of the capital ring in such a cold and brutal way. It must be mentioned that the name list and related evidence sent to Sulu by the Federal Central Computer played a significant role in this purge. Everything was calm. Sulu did not hand over the evidence of Zhong Ziqi's involvement to the higher authorities of the government, nor did he take Group 7 to carry out private revenge. However, not many people noticed that a team member named Shi Peng left the camp and boarded the warship back to the capital ring. On the day Shi Peng left the camp, Sulu saw her off personally. At the gate in the morning, he said, "I know you mean no harm." Shi Peng's face was a little pale. She looked at the familiar barracks and remembered that her closest comrades were still sleeping. After a moment of silence, she said, "Some of the information was indeed leaked by me, but I didn't know they wanted to kill you. That's not the point. The point is that we are a team. We have to leave our backs to each other on the battlefield. In fact, we did the same on Planet 163, Sulu said, but this matter makes it difficult for me to continue trusting you." Shi Peng nodded and said, "I understand, but don't expect me to be moved to tears by your words and become your follower. That's something that only exists in novels." Sulu said. Then the two of them shook hands gently and said goodbye. Silan's Sunset State was calm and tranquil, but the people of S1 Capital Special District found it very difficult to maintain such composure. The government officials and the members of the management committee were utterly troubled by Silan's intense reaction. They began to investigate angrily, trying to figure out who was stupid enough to try to assassinate that tiger with a sniper rifle. If the assassination attempt on Commander Zhong was more like a joke, then the real assassination attempt on Sulu made countless people feel uneasy, especially those who knew the inside story. After confirming that the long-planned assassination attempt did not make Sulu disappear forever, they all made the fastest and most accurate reaction. Lin Daohai, who was riding a fierce horse in the Western Peninsula Meadow Racecourse, was violently dragged off the horse by several burly men from his family. Then, in a short 10 minutes, he boarded a helicopter, switched to the family's private spaceship, and entered Planet S3. Then, he was closely guarded in the Lin family's private manor that covered an area of thousands of square kilometers. This was the Lin family's severe punishment for this good-for-nothing successor, but from another perspective, the house arrest was also because the family elders were very worried that the young lieutenant colonel would repeat the Macklin horror incident. Meanwhile, Nan Mingxiu, who was making a passionate speech in the building of the Parliament Hill to win the mysterious admiration of the female members of the Parliament, was brought back to S2 by the anti-government military personnel of Green Dragon Mountain as quickly as possible. Sadly, he returned to the barren mountain village that he tried so hard to escape from, and returned to the side of his father, the leader he was most afraid of. In addition, the Central Committee of Green Dragon Mountain also sent a congratulatory message to Group 7, who was far away in the West Woods, through Zhang Xiaomeng, who was stationed in the capital ring. They congratulated them on their dazzling achievements on the front line under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. Although this congratulatory message was neither fish nor fowl, it represented a certain attitude. All parties were expressing their views in their own ways. The big shots were wary of Su Li's perseverance and stubbornness, but what worried them more was, in fact, the possible anger that might appear in Philadelphia. Many people in this universe had flipped out, but if the old man beside Lake Feicheng flipped out, even the 7 families would not be able to bear it. However, to many people's surprise, there was no response from Philadelphia. That's because Madam couldn't stand it anymore. No one would have thought that Tiger Zhong would actually use these little guys' tricks to create such a big scene. Speaking of which, like Madam, I really suspect that the killer in room 1302 was added by Tiger Zhong after he knew that someone was going to kill Su Lu. On the top floor of the headquarters of Sanlin United Bank, the skinny old man wearing a funny little hat sat in his exclusive chair. He looked at Li Xiuzhu in front of him and said with a smile, "You did a good job this time. We are financiers, not killers. You know that the profession of a killer is always too dangerous." Chapter 501. The Ministry of National Defense didn't give them any new missions, so Group 7 stayed in their barracks and trained day after day. Even Xiong Lin Quan, who was full of adrenaline and sadism, started to feel bored. Apart from being blinded by the slaughter in front of the battlefield, being shocked by the miserable deaths of their comrades, or drinking too much alcohol during the mobilization before the battle, no one would be willing to go to the front line that was full of death again. However, this kind of waiting was really tormenting the team members' nerves that were getting hardened day by day. Therefore, when the Sunset region welcomed a rare cloudy day, the brutal and bloody training in Group 7's barracks also welcomed a rare holiday. Some of the members began to gather together to play cards and gamble, while others lay on the hammocks under the trees and listened to music. Major Lan Xiaolong, on the other hand, led Song Xiang, Yan Bingyan and dozens of other men to roar and kill their way to the seaside beach that they had longed for a long time. They were prepared to use their burning gazes to kill those Silan girls with bathing suit marks on their youthful bodies. 40 minutes later, this group of people returned to the barracks dejectedly and began to look for leisure activities that they could reluctantly accept. The reason was simple: today was a rare cloudy day in the Sunset region. The chilly wind was blowing by the seaside, and it was wet and cold to the bone. All the beautiful girls in swimsuits had probably stayed at home. Lan Xiaolong nagged non-stop in his sarcastic tone. He walked angrily to Bai Yulan's side and lit a cigarette. He suddenly frowned and looked at Su Lu, who was sitting on a bench at the entrance. He asked Bai Yulan, "Why did our boss become a statue again? Does he think that his small eyes are very charming?" The team members called Su Lu many different names. Some called him Sir, most called him Boss. Only Bai Yulan insisted on calling him Boss or Little Boss, probably because he always remembered the 10 million yuan bank card. Boss received a very strange congratulatory message, so he's having a headache, Bai Yulan said softly. Congratulatory message? That's a good thing. Commander Ship 163 sent it from the headquarters? Don't tell me it's from the Ministry of National Defense, Lan Xiaolong said in surprise. None of them. Bai Yulan brushed the hair in front of her forehead and said softly, Azure Dragon Mountain. The cigarette trembled between Lan Xiaolong's lips. Fortunately, it did not fall to the ground and fall into the dust. He was shocked for a long time before he could speak. What the fuck does it have to do with the anti-government army? Could it be that Green Dragon Mountain thinks that just because our leader has some sort of relationship with that beautiful female guerrilla fighter of theirs, we are their troops? Isn't this too fucking ridiculous? Bai Yulan shrugged her shoulders and said, it is indeed ridiculous. Where did all this nonsense come from? Su Lu scratched his swollen eyebrows. With an annoyed expression, he stood up and said to Lan Xiaolong, I must declare that this congratulatory message from the Azure Dragon Mountain Central Committee is not for me personally, but for our, He looked down at the contents of the congratulatory message on his military cell phone and read, a group of heroic heroes? Nutshell 7. After hearing this dramatic tone, I can finally confirm that this congratulatory message came from Green Dragon Mountain. Lan Xiaolong made a serious judgment. No matter how you look at it, it is still an honor. Su Lu handed the cell phone to Bai Yulan and said, since it is a congratulatory message for us 7, read it to everyone. I am better at this kind of thing. Back in school, I was the main force of the drama club. Lan Xiaolong snatched the cell phone from Bai Yulan's hands and shrugged. It is such a boring day. Reading some boring words can be considered a boring way to pass the time. Everyone gather. He chased away a few members who were playing cards and stood on the table. He shouted to the surrounding people, "Don't panic. This is not a drill, but we don't need you to go to war. We just have a weird congratulatory message to read to you." The members in the camp all roared with laughter and then gathered around. Su Lu did not go over. He sat alone on the camp bench with a cigarette in his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the rarely seen gray sky. He could not help but think of the never-changing sky of his hometown, Donglin. Lan Xiaolong's extremely exaggerated recitation of the congratulatory message and the cheerful laughter of the members came from the other side. A smile appeared on his face, but then his thoughts drifted away. He had been on the front line for a long time. He had received many concerned emails from the capital ring. Zhou Yu, Jian Shuier, Little Watermelon, Shang Qiu, Li Xiaotong, and that beautiful Miss Nan Xiangmei. Even the Wangdu Apartment Owners Committee had sent him a warm and enthusiastic letter. However, he had not received a single letter from Zhang Xiaomeng. This could no longer make him feel disappointed or depressed. He just did not know why, but there was always a faint displeasure in his heart. It was rare to receive an email from her today, but it turned out to be a weird congratulatory message from the Central Committee of Green Dragon Mountain. Thinking of this, he could not help but smile bitterly. His smile suddenly froze. He suddenly turned around and heard the voice on the other side. He stood up angrily and shouted, "Don't read my personal email." Su Lu, hello. This is the 7th letter I've written to you. In the previous letter, I mentioned that I was working at the S2 Peace and Reconstruction Foundation. Of course, don't misunderstand. This foundation has nothing to do with the one in Macklin. I studied education in university, and now I'm a teacher in a village near Green Dragon Mountain in the Oak State. I just want to share some of the happiness of being with those children in peace with you. I know that these letters can be sent to your mailbox, so please don't pretend that you didn't receive them. Although I know that your life on the front line may be very tense and busy, I think that if you set up an automatic return to your mailbox, I might be a little happier. There were cheers and whistles in the barracks, mixed with whispers. There are still 6 months before I have to return to the capital. I don't know when you'll return to S1. I really hope that when the time comes, we'll have the opportunity to meet. I don't want to forever see your figure in the news channel's documentaries. Although your figure in the smoke of battle with Group 7 always makes me and many of my peers cry, but you're wearing sunglasses in those documentaries, so I can't see your eyes. There were howls and whistles in the barracks, mixed with excited profanities. Finally, I want to say that I've never tried to so unreasonably and impolitely ask a member of the opposite sex to respond to me with just a few words. I'm really a little ashamed. However, just like the words I repeated at the end of the previous 6 letters, do you remember what I said to you in the garden of Wood Valley Manor? I miss your Southern Prime Minister. Don't panic, don't panic. There's also a blushing emoji at the end. The barracks suddenly exploded. Lan Xiaolong's excited laughter was still very clear in the midst of the clamor of his team members. Su Lu, who could fight against 1,000 soldiers, was helplessly blocked out by his team members today. He shouted angrily, but no one paid him any attention. Fuck, these guys weren't as fierce on the battlefield as they are today. Su Lu, who was once again pushed out by his team members, looked at his team members who were listening to his private letters with embarrassment, and angrily criticized them. That's because the Empire's people on the battlefield are definitely not as attractive to them as these letters. Beside him, Bai Yulan patted his shoulder comfortingly. She suddenly thought of something and frowned. Southern Prime Minister. Last time on Grey Peak, you said that you also liked her. She, is this girl? Su Lu paused for a moment and then explained, those were my last words. At that time, I thought that I was going to die. Of course, I hoped that after I died, she would feel better. The question is, do you like her or not? Bai Yulan looked into his eyes and asked softly like an emotional columnist. Su Lu lowered his eyes and remained silent. His biggest problem now was that he didn't know who to like. Pay attention. This letter is signed off by Zhou Yu. Do you know who this is? The beloved daughter of our great minister Zhou Yingxing. Su Lu had already lost the energy to stop this farce. He stared fiercely at Lan Xiaolong, who was salivating at the table, and thought about which military discipline he should use to punish this person later. Fortunately, these unclassified letters did not involve his or other people's secrets. After thinking about it, he could only let his team members enjoy this rare carnival. Zhou Yu's letter was as simple and cold as the red-clothed mother's temperament. There weren't many words, but they hit the nail on the head. If you're not dead, write back and let me know. If you're dead, don't tell me. Remember to die far away. Lan Xiaolong and his team members were shocked. They thought that the Minister of Defense's daughter was indeed extraordinary. Even if it was a small grudge between lovers, she could express it so magnificently and viciously. Su Lu was too lazy to pay attention to these people's deliberate misinterpretation. However, he suddenly thought of the next letter on his phone. His pupils shrank nervously. He was prepared to do whatever it took to prevent this from happening, but he found that it was already too late. This was a video message. Lan Xiaolong turned on the external hologram of his phone. The next moment, all the team members in the barracks saw the image on the hologram and collectively took a deep breath. It was an extremely beautiful pair of red lips, exaggeratedly occupying the entire hologram. The owner of the red lips pulled away from the camera, revealing a perfect face that all the men in the Federation recognized. Jian Shuier smiled like a flower, and her eyes cutely narrowed into two crescent moons. She crisply said, "Su Lu, this is to cheer you on. Come back soon." The team members recognized this face. When they heard this sentence, the collective sound of deep breaths suddenly became incomparably loud. It was like a hollow hole in a nutshell engineering department, and the sound was like muffled thunder. Everyone in Team 7 knew that there had been a sensational scandal between their boss and the nation's girl. However, seeing the naked evidence with their own eyes today, their feelings were naturally very different. After the video message finished playing, after a deathly silence, everyone collectively turned around and nailed Su Lu to the ground with shocked, envious, and jealous gazes. Su Lu stubbornly straightened his chest. Suddenly, he noticed two sneaky figures on the periphery of the crowd. His eyes narrowed dangerously as he coldly said, "Cut this, or don't blame me for being rude." The production duo from the Venus documentary studio had lived and fought with Team 7 for a long time. The team members had long been accustomed to each other's existence. The reporter and host, who was rumored to win countless awards for the documentary, Team 7, keenly discovered such a great material today. How could he let it go so easily? He had been secretly filming in the dark. Unexpectedly, in the end, it was still discovered by Su Lu. The production crew knew Su Li's personality very well, so they very sadly and helplessly pulled out the data strip. At this moment, the electronic monitoring equipment that Gu Shifeng had set up around the camp suddenly began to emit a sharp sound. The ground began to tremble, and strange echoes appeared in the air. The team members who reacted quickly immediately ran to the armory. "It can't be the Empire. They're attacking," Su Lu said with a frown. "Yes." Bai Yulan put her right hand into her pocket and held the delicate bayonet handle. Then what happened? Su Li's eyes narrowed again. Chapter 502. Group 7's barracks were located in a quiet, shallow hilly area on the outskirts of Sunset State. It was quite far from the Federal Forces barracks, so not many people came to disturb them. The main planet of the West Woods was now filled with soldiers, battleships, and airplanes. The glory of the charter was everywhere, but this nutshell mercenary army directly under the Ministry of National Defense was still very vigilant in setting up security and surveillance measures. Under Gu Shifeng's arrangement, the precise electronic control equipment could accurately capture any abnormal movement within a 30-kilometer radius. Sharp alarms rang out one after another in the barracks. The members with vigilant expressions were busy, but they did not panic. They used their fastest speed to put on the individual combat systems, carried all kinds of heavy firearms, and came to their own defense zone. The warehouse door at the back had already been opened, and the low rumbling sound of military vehicles could rush out at any time. The 7 firing points around the barracks were equipped with heavy firepower, and the black MX mecha had already appeared under the control of the logisticians in the gloomy weather. In this tense and oppressive atmosphere, the shaking of the earth became clearer and clearer, and the noise outside the barracks also became louder and louder. Who knew how many troops were gathering here? Su Li's thick eyebrows were tightly furrowed, but he did not immediately enter battle mode like his team members and board his black mecha. Instead, he stared at the tightly shut door. Every movement on this planet was under the surveillance of the charter computer. He did not believe that he would be in any danger without the old man's warning. The next moment, his calm expression could not help but change, and he showed a strong sense of vigilance and alertness. The heavy sound of rolling tanks and the low rumbling of military engines outside the barracks became louder and louder. These sounds broke through the sky, shaking the forest behind the barracks to the point that the birds in the forest behind the barracks were incomparably quiet, shaking the earth non-stop, shaking his face slightly pale. It would take at least a few hundred heavy tanks to drive in at the same time to create such a commotion. This meant that Group 7's barracks were currently surrounded by an entire squadron of mechanics. What surprised Su Lu even more was that beyond the outer walls of the barracks, he could clearly see the cold and stern bodies of dozens of mecha. Those were the Federation's newest model, the MX mecha. Looking down at the barracks from above, they were like gods, naturally exuding an irresistible aura. Su Lu raised his eyebrows and flipped over the wall of the barracks. He came to the highest sniping point and looked out the wall. His pair of lively black eyebrows suddenly froze. Beyond the walls of the camp, there was a dense army as far as the eye could see. On the roads and fields, there were close to 1,000 armored vehicles that were actually lined up more than 10 kilometers away. There were also countless huge engineering mechs and military equipment covered in green cloth scattered among them, not to mention those silent tall black mechs scattered all around. It was at least an entire team of mechanics. No, the number of mechas far exceeded the standard equipment of the Federation. Furthermore, the equipment of this team was far more advanced than the average equipment on the battlefield. Just one look was enough to make people tremble in fear. The members of Group 7 in the barracks were all fierce people who had survived the battlefield. However, even as strong as they were, they found it hard to digest what they were seeing right now. If it weren't for the clear Federal Army Gold Star insignia on the equipment of the troops outside the barracks, the team members would even be shocked to think that the people of the Empire had broken through the space tunnel and that the crazy Emperor had sent all of his most terrifying royal guards over, just to crush a small mercenary team of less than 100 people from the Federation. This kind of thinking was absurd, but the team members who were originally planning to vent their frustration of not being able to see the beauties on the beach today could no longer yell with a fierce expression. Instead, they subconsciously lowered the muzzles in their hands and looked at each other, unable to summon any courage to fight. Even the automatic fire system that Gu Shifeng had set up in the barracks was deactivated at this moment. The troops outside the walls occupied the entire land. The ones that truly surrounded Group 7 were only a small number of vehicles in the vanguard. How could their few guns stop such a large number of troops? This unknown group of Federation mechanics probably wouldn't launch an attack on the pitiful camp of Group 7. Su Lu, with the calm of an engineer, quickly confirmed this point. Those rumbling war chariots and the dangerous and powerful MX mecha all stopped silently where they were. If their goal was to destroy Group 7, all they needed was a simple cannon barrage or a casual armored charge, and Group 7's barracks and all its members would be reduced to dust. A fleet of vehicles could be faintly seen on the road. He stood on top of the wall in a daze. Suddenly, he rubbed his face hard, rubbing his previously pale cheeks until they turned red. Only then did he take a deep breath, jump off the ground, and walk toward the door. The door of the barracks slowly opened. More than 10 bulletproof military vehicles with prominent license plates slowly drove in and then with difficulty parked side by side in the not-so-spacious area of the barracks. The team members had already felt that there was something fishy about today's incident. The old team members had sharp eyes, while the new team members had extraordinary family backgrounds. They all discovered an even more shocking truth from the license plates of these military vehicles. The heavy doors of the vehicles opened one by one. More than 20 white-haired big shots wearing formal military uniforms alighted from the vehicles. These big shots all had one thing in common, and that was that they all had one or more shining golden stars on their shoulders. At this moment, Sulu somewhat suspected that all the generals of the Federation had come to his little courtyard. He wondered if he should go up and say welcome to his humble abode, but then he realized that his current emotions were somewhat comical. Among the guests, only 2 were not wearing military uniforms. One was Mr. Nutshell, the CEO that Sulu was very familiar with. This middle-aged man was in control of the largest corporation in the Federation. He looked at him with an admiring and proud gaze, but did not give him any hints. The other was an official with a smile on his face. He was wearing a black formal suit. He was the director of the Office of the President's Residence, Breen. Su Li's pupils shrank slightly. This director Breen had a close relationship with Macho in the back of the mountain. Later on, he firmly became the most loyal housekeeper of President Pabre. He was deeply trusted by the president and was an out-and-out powerful figure in the political world of the Federation. In the past year or so, His Excellency the President's concerns and suggestions for him were usually conveyed by this director. And the 2 banquets that he had been honored with in the President's residence were also arranged by this director. But Sulu did not immediately greet the other. Instead, he quickly walked toward those generals with solemn expressions and some kind of emotional expression. Among these generals, there were people with even greater backgrounds than Director Breen. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu of the Ministry of National Defense's General Assembly Base reporting for duty. Please give me your orders. He stood at attention and looked straight ahead. He gave a very standard military salute to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Federation and the commander of the 1st Military Region, General Miles. The second target of the salute was the Federation's frontline commander-in-chief, the Westwoods Tiger, who was looking at him with a very mysterious smile. Then there was Deputy Minister Chen of the Ministry of National Defense, Dean Shi of the 2nd Military Academy, the commander of the 4th Army of the Federation, the Chief of Staff of the Westwoods Command. The members of Group 7 had already lined up behind Sulu. They looked straight ahead and allowed the big shots of the military to inspect them. Their excitement was mixed with a strong sense of unease. No one could understand why the big shots of the federal military would collectively come to visit Group 7's camp when the war between the Federation and the Empire was fierce. What made the team members even more confused was that even though these commanders and generals had noble identities, wasn't it a bit too exaggerated to bring an entire team of mechanics as a security force? In the formation, only Lan Xiaolong and Bai Yulan vaguely guessed something. They knew that Sulu might not have found the real common point of these generals, but they clearly caught that point because they had recited the glorious war history of their unit countless times when they first joined the army. Thinking of that possibility, Bai Yulan, who was usually the calmest and most indifferent person, couldn't help but have a hint of excitement on her face. Other than the Westwoods Tiger who was responsible for receiving the people from the capital ring, the military leaders who suddenly came to Group 7's camp today had one thing in common: they were all subordinates of army god Li Pifu. They were all from the 1st Division of the Federation, the 17th Division. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Federation, General Miles was the real leader of the Federal Army compared to the low-key Defense Minister Zhou Yingxing. Ever since Army God Li Pifu retired to the lakeside of Feicheng, all the command of the federal forces were in his hands. With his hands behind his back, General Miles looked at Su Lu and said, "We don't have any instructions. We are just here to announce something." In a short period of time, the engineering team had already set up a temporary platform. The sound system had also been set up. Countless large sound amplification devices were placed around the camp, aimed at the troops outside the barracks that covered the mountains and plains. General Miles, Director Breen, and the CEO of Nutshell walked up to the podium. The rest of the generals had a satisfied smile on their faces as they stood below the podium. Su Lu glanced at Zhong Suahu. He knew that in such a public place, there was a huge difference between him and the commander-in-chief of the Federation's front line. After thinking for a while, he silently returned to Group 7's camp. General Miles looked at the soldiers below the podium with a serious expression. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "President Pabre personally signed the order. According to the military organization regulations of the Federation, the order was passed by the Military Committee of the Management Committee and implemented by the Ministry of Defense. On behalf of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Federation, I officially announce this. The Federation will rebuild the 17th Division." Under the podium, Su Lu felt a bit confused. He didn't expect that the news that would shake the entire Federation would be announced so easily by General Miles. The fact that he had been guessing for a long time appeared in front of his eyes so quickly. He was a bit unprepared. General Miles's voice came out of the barracks through the sound amplification system and echoed in the wilderness. It echoed in the ears of the members of Group 7 and the soldiers of the Federation who were waiting solemnly. The troops outside the barracks had traveled countless light years from the capital ring to the West Woods region. Tens of thousands of soldiers had been guessing and waiting. At this moment, they finally heard the answer they wanted to hear the most. After a suffocating silence, a thunderous roar of excitement suddenly sounded in the wilderness. Chapter 503. The expressions of the members of Group 7 in the barracks froze for a moment, as if they were awakened by the thunderous cheers outside the walls. They no longer cared about Supervisor Su Lu, who had his head slightly lowered, nor did they have the time to pay attention to the big shots not far away. They raised the guns in their hands high up in the air and roared in excitement. They screamed and jumped around randomly. No one was crazy enough to fire a shot into the sky, but countless military caps flew into the gloomy sky today. The troops outside the walls were all equipped with advanced equipment from the Harbor City Guard District and the 1st Military Region. When they heard General Miles announce that the Federation was officially reorganizing the legendary 17th Division, they knew that they were going to be part of the legendary troops of the Federation. Of course, they were incomparably excited. Compared to these tens of thousands of soldiers, Group 7 inside the walls seemed to have more reason to be excited and proud. The old members of Group 7 in the nutshell were basically all from the 17th Division. Bai Yulan, who had joined when she was young, had personally experienced the final glory and sorrow of the 17th Division before it was disbanded. As for the new members of Group 7, they were originally the popinjays of the Harbor City Garrison Guard District. They came from Unit 83-84, and no matter how this unit had humiliated and infuriated the seniors of the 17th Division over the past few years, the blood in their veins still retained the traces of this legendary majestic division, and their bodies were branded with the mark of the 17th Division. The 17th Division was the only field unit that the Federation's god of war, Li Pifu, had served in his entire life. This mighty army had slaughtered its way into the Gary Corridor 3 times, forcefully attacking the heart of the empire, and had never tasted a single defeat in more than 100 bloody battles. It had the most glorious history of the Federal Army, and had made countless contributions to the Federation. Su Lu didn't need anyone to remind him. Like countless other male Federation citizens, he could recite the battle history of this legendary army like the back of his hand. However, in his bones, he was still that calm engineer. In addition, he had joined the army halfway, so he hadn't received the training of the army. He wasn't an old member of the 17th Division, so it was difficult for him to understand the emotions of the countless soldiers inside and outside the walls, as well as the countless generals on and off the platform. He looked at the tears and excitement in the eyes of the young and old soldiers. He could understand, but it was difficult for him to fully immerse himself in it. Instead, a faint sense of frustration appeared in his heart. The Federation reorganizing the 17th Division, on one hand, was to give instructions to the old man, but on the other hand, it was to send a strong message to the entire universe. That was that, the Federal forces would definitely be like the 17th Division in the end and obtain the final victory in the end. But what did this have to do with him? The moment this thought appeared, it was instantly shattered. Su Li's lips curled into a bitter smile. The god of war, who was as tall and dangerous as a snowy mountain, had personally rescued him from a Lure prison and allowed him to enter the training base as an instructor. Lan Xiaolong had left the garrison area of the port city, reformed Group 7, and urgently recruited soldiers from Unit 83-84 on the front lines. All of this had been foreshadowed long ago. His career on the battlefield was bound to be closely linked to the most famous 17th Division of the Federation. Su Lu was thinking. No one laughed, and no one paid attention. The members in the barracks were so excited that their faces were slightly red. The big shots of the Federal Army were filled with emotions. Everyone was completely focused on everything that was happening on the platform. Director Breen read the congratulatory letter personally written by President Pabre. In the letter, the president passionately reviewed the glorious achievements of the 17th Division in the past battles. Using a sincere tone, he used 17 imposing sentences to look forward to the great future that would happen in the vast universe. He encouraged all the soldiers of the 17th Division and all the troops of the Federation that participated in the battle to inherit the God of War's heroic spirit when the Federation was in dire straits. The last person to give a speech on the stage was the CEO of Nutshell. It was already surprising that the biggest entrepreneur in the Federation would participate in the rebuilding of the most legendary troop of the Federation. In his passionate speech, it was even more puzzling that the focus of his speech was on Nutshell Group 7. He praised the outstanding performance of the members of Group 7 on Planet 5460 and Planet 163, firmly believing that they did not embarrass the 17th Division and Nutshell. He also expressed that he would continue to support the righteous cause of the Federal Army. The film crews of the most important TV stations in the Federation had already entered the barracks. They wanted to use the fastest speed to broadcast this major event that would definitely greatly increase the morale of the Federation. These reporters with extremely sensitive news senses, after witnessing the excitement of history, calmly captured some very interesting clues from the location chosen by the Federation for the announcement and the conversation between the CEO of Nutshell. After the 3 episodes of the documentary were broadcasted on the Federation's news channel, Nutshell Group 7 had already become the most famous combat team in the hearts of the Federation's citizens. Because of the small number of people and the distinct facial features of the members, they were even more popular than the Iron 7 Division. But in the eyes of the reporters, the one with the most news value, the one who was able to link the 17th Division and the 7th Division together, was naturally that Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. As Nutshell Group CEO's speech ended, countless cameras quickly moved away from the stage. Among the densely packed soldiers in the barracks, they quickly searched for the young lieutenant colonel's figure. Meanwhile, the reporters held the microphones in their hands, ready to rush over at any moment. At this time, Su Li's mood was still a little uncertain. He was analyzing what kind of role the president, or rather the old man in Philadelphia, would want him to play in the new 17th Division. He was completely unaware of everything that was happening in the barracks. Suddenly, someone beside him handed him a pair of sunglasses. Sulu was slightly taken aback, but he immediately reacted. He put the sunglasses on his nose bridge, covering half of his face, and sincerely said, "Thank you. You're welcome. I followed you to the front line, washed the bullets, and worked for a few months, but I still couldn't get a picture of your face without sunglasses. To be precise, you didn't let me take a picture. If that's the case, why should I let my colleagues take a picture?" The reporter from the Gold Star documentary studio looked at the disappointed colleagues in the distance and said sarcastically, "Are all the people in the news industry as ruthless as you?" Sulu said, "But by Ziming, you have to remember, before I give you permission, you still can't take a picture of my face without sunglasses. Your whole family is the news industry, I'm the documentary director and narrator." Bai Ziming waved his hand in annoyance, then said, "But in the future, you'll have to show your face in front of the entire Federation. I only hope that you'll leave your first chance to me." "No problem." Sulu smiled. "Actually, I didn't like you before, because you were quite kind to everyone, but when you looked at the two of us, you'd always have a deadpan expression." Bai Ziming shrugged and said, "But now that I think back on the past few months, I really feel that it was worth it, even though it was tough." He turned his head to look at Sulu and said seriously, "When I think about how I might be able to follow by the side of the youngest commander in the history of the Federation for so long, and as the commander of the 17th Division at that, I'm excited, I'm proud." Sulu was speechless. He thought to himself that if the president really agreed to let a guy who wasn't even 23 years old become the commander of the 17th Division, not to mention how shocked the entire Federation would be, the First Lady would probably immediately suggest that her husband go see a psychiatrist. The Federation really did carry out the reorganization swiftly and decisively. The new 17th Division's combat decision-making structure and the appointment of officers quickly unfolded in the unassuming barracks of Group 7. There was an endless stream of officers walking into the barracks with excited expressions, receiving their appointment certificates, and saluting in all directions with their trembling right hands. What made Sulu feel incomparably complicated was that he was very familiar with quite a few of these officers. The appointment of the senior military officers was also officially announced. Sulu was not surprised to find that the commander was not himself, but rather a gentle-looking middle-aged major general whom he had never seen before. The appointments of the staff and various department heads were also quickly completed. Among them, Sulu heard quite a few familiar names. Lei, Lin Ai, Mizuru, Hua Xiaoxi, a quarter of the military officer cadets from the training base were selected by the Ministry of Defense from their respective units and assigned to the new 17th Division. These people had all been Su Li's students and had once sung military songs together in the majestic clubhouse. They thought that they would only meet again on the battlefield, but who knew that they would meet again today? Lieutenant Colonel Lei took on the glorious role of regiment commander of the 1st Regiment. Hua Xiaoxi took on the role of captain of the MX Mecha Brigade specially formed by the new 17th Division. Lin Ai and Gu Shifeng from the academic faction were in charge of the electronic reaction team. Mizuru, who came from the Federal Fleet, took on the role of liaison officer for the new 17th Division with some grievance. Meanwhile, the rest of the cadets also took on important positions. They were different from the mid-level officers trained by the Federation. Nutshell Team 7 was officially incorporated into the federal military structure. Other than Magnolia and a few core members, the rest of the members were all scattered and assigned to basic positions in the new 70th Division. Most of them took on positions that did not need to be announced at this time, but a few were officially appointed as company commanders. Even Ning He, a member of old Team 7, who was originally in the command ship outside Planet 163, was transferred to the staff department of the new 17th Division as a confidential staff officer. Nutshell's Whitewater Team 7 was, without a doubt, the most ferocious and terrifying mercenary team in the Federation in recent years. And they were able to do this because the old members were all from the most powerful 17th Division of the Federation. No matter which battlefield they were on, the training they had received and the sense of honor they bore made them use cold-blooded mission reports to continue the glorious tradition of the 17th Division. And now, the 17th Division was being reorganized from scratch. Team 7 began to provide feedback, providing the new division with countless basic officers and the fighting spirit of the old 17th Division that they had always silently protected. Finally, Sulu heard his name and his newest position. The technical director of the 17th Division. He raised his head with some surprise, silently thinking back to the military history of the Federation. Had there ever been such a strange position? If the military was not the nutshell engineering department, what was the technical director for? The flashing lights illuminated the black sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. The newspaper reporters were still not satisfied, but were rudely pushed aside by the cameraman of the television station. Countless cameras surrounded him and began to rapidly and excitedly ask him questions. Sulu did not hear the reporters' questions clearly. He subconsciously turned his head to look at Bai Ziming and said seriously, "I said before, I can't be a division commander." Bai Ziming looked at him and said with a strange tone, "But everyone knows that this is your division." Chapter 504. In the middle of the night, the office lights in the room lit up calmly, not blinking at all. Sulu sat silently in front of the desk, not moving at all. He stared at the constantly scrolling screen on the workbench, earnestly recording the various equipment models and related technical data. Even though he still did not understand what the so-called technical director meant, when he received all the equipment data of the new 17th Division in the evening, he threw himself into his work without hesitation. A long time later, a low rumbling sound would occasionally ring out from outside the barracks, waking him up from his hard work. He used his fingertips to rub the space between his eyebrows, feeling the sensation of his eyebrows from his fingertips. He could not help but recall the action of shaving his eyebrows every day back in Yale University. Closing the workbench, Sulu shook his head, knowing that his sturdy heart was indeed quite shaken by that long list of equipment. The newly formed 17th Division had the most advanced technical equipment in the entire Federation, or rather in the entire universe. Whether it was the electronic equipment or the firepower system, they were all shockingly advanced. Some of the newest models, in his memory, were just blueprints from the nutshell engineering department 2 years ago. What shocked Sulu the most was the number of mecha the new 17th Division was equipped with. An entire division of mechanics was actually equipped with 60 of the newest MX mecha. Sulu thought of the Imperial Moonwolf group he had first encountered at the front lines, and his brows furrowed slightly. It looked like the Federation was really preparing to learn from the Empire. Minister Zhou Yingxing's words at the base last year had really become the goal of the Federal Army's reform. The new 17th Division was very likely to be modified into a full mecha division in the war, and this majestic division would become the forerunner of the Federation's military reform. In the military plan to invade the Empire's mainland in the next year, the new 17th Division would be the forerunner. With heavy thoughts on the Federation's military reform in mind, Sulu walked out of his room and came to the field. However, he found, somewhat at a loss, that the barracks of Group 7 tonight was no longer the one he was familiar with. The headquarters of the new 17th Division was located 7 kilometers away on a gentle slope. The members of the 7 teams had all gone to their respective combat units, so the entire barracks was empty. The surroundings were quiet, and he could no longer hear the sounds of cards being played or chatted, which made it difficult for him to get used to. He climbed up to the roof and sat quietly beside the automatic hydraulic cannon. His right hand gently stroked the cold metal tube as his gaze fell outside the courtyard wall. Under the night sky, barracks spread all over the hills and covered the fields that were usually dark. The large engineering mechs that were still working in the distance occasionally let out roars, replacing the usual croaking of frogs. In just a dozen or so hours, the mulberry field did not turn into a sea. Instead, it turned into a vast military camp filled with a solemn atmosphere. Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly, and a wistful smile appeared on his face. This really seemed like a miracle from the Creator, but in reality, it was a display of the Federation's magnificent power. The temporary barracks of the new 17th Division had basically been completed. Only the water supply and drainage system was still undergoing the final stages of construction. The Federation had made ample preparations, and Su Lu, who had witnessed all of this, finally understood why the Federation had arranged for Group 7's barracks to be in such a remote area. It turned out that the Federation had been planning for the arrival of a division from the very beginning. The sound of light footsteps came from behind him. Su Lu did not turn around, because he knew who it was. Bai Yulan sat down beside him, lifting the fine hair in front of her forehead that fluttered in the night wind. She looked seriously at the simple notebook in her hands and said softly, "Division Commander Yu Qinghai, from a logistics background. However, he has nothing to do with Minister Zhou. Many years ago, he was already the division chief of the old 17th Division. Later on, he became a military official. I heard that the war god likes to eat the food he cooks the most. According to his qualifications and his position as a direct descendant of the 17th Division, logically speaking, he should have been promoted to Major General a long time ago. Of course, it was definitely an idle position. Because of some luck, he never got promoted. According to the Ministry of Defense, his ability is not enough to be the highest-ranking military official. At most, he should be a division commander." Coincidentally, during the reorganization of the 17th Division, after much consideration, the President's office and the Joint Staff officers finally chose him. The Federation does not have many major general division commanders. Du Shaoqing of the Iron 7th Division is one. The new 17th Division commander will definitely have the rank of Major General. The Federation's arrangement is very suitable. Bai Yulan looked seriously at Su Lu and said, "The most important thing is that Division Commander Yu Qinghai has a gentle temperament. He is famous in the military for being a good person. He never fights for power." Many people believe that his appointment as the new 17th Division commander was partly due to luck, and partly because he is very willing to be a transitional figure. Next is the history of the Deputy Division Commander and the Chief of Staff. I will report it to you. Bai Yulan had joined the army at the age of 16. Although he appeared quiet and gentle, he was a real veteran. Otherwise, he would not have been given the nickname of Olay Oil. Based on his relationship with the officers and soldiers of the new 17th Division, he easily found out the history of all the senior officers in the division. Su Lu interrupted his report, looked at him with a complicated expression, and said, "Why do you want to investigate this? We are subordinates. We only need to follow orders. Don't tell me you are going to do something like seize power in the army." Hearing this, Bai Yulan seemed to want to shrug his shoulders, but in the end, he did not move. He said softly, "That's right. There is no need to care about this. Everyone can see that the right to command is yours." Su Lu thought about what that documentary enthusiast with the same surname Bai had said earlier in the day. He could not help but shake his head and laugh bitterly. Regardless of whether Su Lekang would admit it or not, the new 17th Division had already been imprinted with his clear imprint from the very beginning of its reconstruction. He was a member of Team 7, who had taken up important positions in the middle ranks, battle strategists, and even regiment commanders. Although in name, he was only an assistant division commander, he did not have the rank of technical director. Bai Yulan left the roof. Su Lu looked quietly at the barracks that stretched for who knew how many kilometers outside the walls. He thought about the tens of thousands of Federation soldiers, the countless amounts of heavy equipment, and the black shadow of the MX Mecha resting in the distance like a stone giant. His mood became somewhat heavy and uneasy. Such a big commotion. "Why didn't you tell me beforehand?" he said to a certain existence in his mind. The central computer did not respond for a few seconds. Then, two simple words appeared in his left eye, surprise. Oh, Su Lu said mockingly, "What a fucking surprise." The central computer replied calmly, "You rarely swear." Sulu replied in his mind, looks like you don't understand me completely. When I am greatly stimulated, I will definitely swear. However, it will definitely not be as loud as this time. The central computer was silent for a moment, and then asked in a white glowing symbol, don't you feel proud? Is it the kind of feeling where the development of something is beyond your imagination but can satisfy your physical and psychological expectations, or the feeling of being acknowledged or respected? The night wind brushed past Su Li's face. He was slightly dizzy from the dense white words that occupied his entire left eye's field of vision. After a moment of silence, he scratched his head and grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth, and said, a little, haha. Looks like he really was stimulated. Lieutenant Colonel Sulu can also laugh foolishly. I really regret not bringing a miniature camera to secretly record this. Bai Zimying's shocked expression appeared on the latter. After interacting with this documentary producer, director, narrator and reporter for so long, the members of Team 7 no longer hated him. Sulu also accepted this person's existence, but when he thought about how his stupid smile had been seen by the other, he could not help but feel somewhat awkward. He asked, yes. Yes. Bai Zimying did not climb up. With a trace of unwillingness, he said, last time when the news channel aired the third episode, none of the members watched it. This time, it was rebroadcast late at night. I want to remind you that according to the contract signed between the Golden Star Film Factory and the news channel, they only have the right to broadcast 2 episodes. If you still don't watch it now, then you can only wait for half a year to go to the cinema to watch the extended special version. The smile on Su Li's face disappeared. He said, I'm just curious. I've clearly destroyed that material. I repaired it because I thought that scene was worth recording, Bai Zimying said softly. Even if it's for the sake of commemoration, I really hope that you guys can watch it. Sulu was silent for a moment, and then he patted the other's shoulder and said, I believe that you must have filmed them very well, but watching them leave again is really not good. The night wind was quite cold. Strangely enough, when it was deep into the night in the barracks of Sunset State, it was also deep into the night in the capital of the distant planet S1. In a side building of the majestic Parliament Hill, there was an office whose wide floor-to-ceiling windows shone with light and faintly flickering fluorescent lights. On the surface, Zhang Xiaomeng was an official stationed in the capital of Azure Dragon Mountain. She was in charge of publicity and liaison with the Federation Management Committee, but in secret, she was taking over the overall work of Azure Dragon Mountain's 4 branches. Strangely enough, the anti-government army's intelligence organization was the 4 branches. The department used by the Federation Investigation Bureau to attack Azure Dragon Mountain spies was also called the 4 branches. The continuous work of day and night made her appear somewhat tired. Her pair of black-rimmed glasses, which only had a sense of remembrance and vigilance, could not hide the haggardness between her eyebrows. At this moment, her expression was very relaxed and very calm. This was because she was watching television, but there seemed to be a layer of moisture under the glasses. The news channel was rebroadcasting the 3rd episode of the documentary, Team 7. This episode was called Survival and Death. It had caused an even greater sensation in the Federation than the previous 2 episodes. According to the relevant statistics of the Ministry of Defense, the recruitment of soldiers in some states had even been greatly improved because of this. The documentary on the TV screen had already reached its end, entering the death part. The Golden Star Factory's camera crew was not able to follow the final mission of Team 7, so the camera used the method of rewinding. The lively faces gradually became monochrome and tranquil, and then disappeared from the scene. The monochrome image was pulled back a bit far. A military vehicle was seen arriving at the entrance of the barracks with a cloud of dust. A young lieutenant colonel with a blurred face was extremely tired. He dragged his injured body out of the vehicle, and the surviving members of the team surrounded him. Then, the young lieutenant colonel began to light cigarettes to the members of the team. Everyone began to smoke in silence. The rising smoke in the barrack seemed to be a memorial to the departure of some people. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.